with Torrey Krug. The latest I've heard on that is that, he is willing to waive the no-trade clause for a select few teams. And is that 4 teams, 6 teams, and which teams are they? And how tough is it going to be for Doug Armstrong to deal with those teams and make a trade for Torrey Krug? So, if a trade were to be made, I think he's a guy who would be involved. I think that the Blues have also talked to Justin Faulk about the potential of waiving his no-trade clause. I don't know how far that's gone down the road. So I think that they're trying to change that defense.
Here I am coming in the next day after I put the conductor hat on to celebrate the Cardinals. They lay a dud, and I'm thinking we're opening up, trying to justify me putting the hat on. But then I'm driving in this morning, and on the opening drive, I'm listening to Randy and Brooke and Dan and Rock, and then JR just drops this nugget of he's hearing that Torrey Krug has at least considered waiving his no-trade clause, and Justin Faulk. Welcome in, everybody, a Friday edition of BK and Ferrario. No BK today as he is prepping for 800 people to come to his house. I believe it was 800 people. Probably not. You know how my math works. So he's out today. He'll be back with us on Monday when we're out at Centene for Prospect Camp. But tonight, night 1 of the NHL draft, and along with Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. And this is what I expect. I expect some types of rumors to start coming out as we get closer and closer to the start of the draft at 7 o'clock tonight. I did not expect this, though. I did not expect to hear our insider for The Athletic, Jeremy Rutherford, talk about Torrey Krug potentially being interested in waiving his no-trade clause and providing 4 to 6 teams that he would be willing to get traded to. That is the start of the framework of a trade of switching up your entire defensive core. And again, it felt like it was just a matter of time after they tried to trade him last year. He waived his no-trade clause. Last season did not go well. You see that next year you have a modified no-trade clause, which is even more likely you get moved out of St. Louis. And the part that I didn't think of, the more I kind of worked through it in my head when I heard JR say this, is you brought in Claude Julien. Now, I used that as a positive reference yesterday. What if it's a negative reference? Tell me that's not a Doug Armstrong move of we need Torrey Krug to move out.
Do you enjoy Claude Julien when you were with him in Boston? No, I wouldn't have been.
Hired.
Guess what? He's the new assistant coach.
Look, all of that's tinfoil. But what is not tinfoil is the fact that the Blues, and Jeremy Rutherford is reporting that Torrey Krug and Justin Faulk have at least been approached about waiving those no-trade clauses.
Yeah, that's a big development for the Blues offseason, because part of the reason that I've been very skeptical of if they would be able to move Torrey Krug, of course, one is the contract, $6.5 million for the next, I believe, 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 3 years. That's a hard deal to move. And it's really hard when it's a no-trade clause to where it can really limit what you're doing. And last year, Torrey Krug said, one, I don't want to go to Philadelphia. And the other thing that I think he said publicly was, I don't want to move my family, which is totally understandable. And he's earned that right with the no-trade clause. So I kind of have been on the assumption of he's probably going to do maybe the same thing. It's the final year that he can finally have a say in this before it does become modified. But now that it sounds like he's willing to at least explore the idea of being open to a trade, all right, well, now your offseason can really get in full gear to where you can potentially call some of those teams that maybe he has interest in and say, hey, you got interest in Torrey Krug? We've been looking to move him for the last 2 years, and now you can really start that reshuffling of the blue line, which has been really the thing we've talked about for, the last 2 off seasons of this is a must. Well, it's not only a must again this year, it now sounds at least somewhat plausible that they might actually be able to make a change this time around.
I want to play this piece of audio, too, and then I want to get Grant's thoughts, but the reason that I think it's more likely that it does happen, because, look, you can hear rumors all the time of, he'd at least consider waiving his no-trade clause. He provided 4 to 6 teams. Those are probably 4 to 6 teams that don't have cap space, that aren't in a contention that the Blues could make a deal with, that are trying to win a Stanley Cup. But here's why I find it more interesting, and this was Elliot Friedman on his 32 Thoughts podcast.
There's several teams out there you're looking at for D. And several players. It's musical chairs, right? There's Toronto looking for 1D, maybe 2. There's Boston, I think, looking for a D.
Yep.
There's Nashville looking for at least 1D. There's Utah looking for 1 or 2. There's New Jersey. Like, there's a bunch of teams looking for D. So there's this merry-go-round here.
And it depends on what type of D they're looking for, because Torrey Krug is a very specific brand of defenseman. He's an offensive puck mover. He's a guy that's probably not going to be great in your defensive zone. Some of those teams, I doubt Torrey Krug is willing to waive his no-trade clause to. Some of those teams don't want to trade for Torrey Krug. But you also have Philadelphia, who, hear me out, I know he nixed it last season, but Philadelphia is now in at least somewhat of a contention mode. They need puck-moving defensemen. They were interested in them last year. The Detroit Red Wings do not have puck-moving defensemen. So all I'm saying is, if this is the offseason that teams are looking for defense and they don't want to pay astronomical prices when it comes to the free agent market for defensemen, and if the Blues are willing to at least get somewhat creative in terms of retaining salary, attaching picks, if the guy's willing to move on, you might have an open for business sign on the front of the Blues table at the draft tonight.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to be interested to know, is would they be willing to eat some salary? Can you make this maybe a $6.5 million deal down to 5.5? I don't think you eat half of it, especially with 3 years left, but would you be willing to retain some of it while you're in the midst of a retool? It seems to make sense. It seems like the perfect time to be doing so, to try and get a Krug deal done. Maybe attach a second-round pick as well to it. We saw that's what it cost to send Jake Wallman from Detroit to San Jose, but he had a lower cap hit, so it might be a little bit more. But this feels like, I hate to call it like a positive, because I don't want to say like getting rid of Torrey Krug is like a major positive, because I don't want to take that kind of a shot at a player. But it is a good development for the offseason of hopefully being able to potentially trade this blue line. Because when I heard that cut from Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts podcast last night when I was listening to it, my first thought was, okay, well, if you can't move Krug or Faulk, maybe you have to explore the Nick Leddy route. But Krug and Faulk are the top two guys that you probably want to move and hang on to Nick Leddy in this retool. So I think this is the best case scenario for the Blues. Try and maybe retain some salary, see if you can find a partner that works with him. And now you also free up a spot in your top four and allow for a Matt Kessel, for example, to play in that spot, or maybe Scott Perunovich if you want to bump him into the top four as well.
Yeah, for me, I think when I heard that, it was the first time I had a little bit of hope when it came to the defense in about a year and a half. And again, that's not a shot at specifically Torrey Krug or Justin Faulk or whoever the Blues might be interested in trading, but it hasn't worked out defensively. It just hasn't. That's a fact. So, maybe not individually as players is it shots at them, but as a defensive unit as a whole, it hasn't worked. So some of the teams that Elliot Friedman mentioned there, the biggest one that was interesting to me was New Jersey, because they're a team that was in the playoffs 2 years ago, looked to be somewhat of a threat, took a major step back this season, a lot of the reason due to goaltending, and they improved their goaltending already this offseason. Would a player be willing to go to New Jersey? I could see that. They've already mentioned that they kind of want one of everything this offseason. They seem like a team in desperation mode to get back into relevance again. So there's definitely options out there. It feels like this is a time right now where a lot of teams are desperate for defense. And so the Blues have the upper hand in this situation. If they already have some teams that Torrey Krug has said that he wants to go to, it seems like it'd be an easy ability to get it done at this point.
Yeah, New Jersey's interesting mostly because, this is their left-handed defenseman, Jonas Siegenthaler, Luke Hughes, and Brendan Smith, who's a UFA. So, they don't have a lot of lefties if that's the route you're going to go. I don't know exactly what teams he would be willing to move to. I just got to go off of reference. He played in Boston, loved Boston. Boston didn't want him back. Is Boston one of those teams? He's from Michigan. Detroit could be one of those teams. Those are at least some of the ones that I would look at. Bigger picture on the Blues side, because look, this all falls into the hands of Torrey Krug and Justin Faulk. If they are asked to waive their no-trade clause, it's going to have to come down to what team is willing to trade for him and what team are they willing to go to. But this was priority number one by the Blues this offseason. This offseason was, you've got to fix your defensive core. Because 2 years ago, going into the season, it was, hey, this defense we believe can be better than what they were. And they weren't. And then when we were in Nashville last year at this time, T-Bone, at the end of the draft, Doug Armstrong was asked about potentially moving a defenseman. And he said, look, we're not going to move him just to move him. We expect that last year was just an anomaly, and if it wasn't, then we'll address it. And last year was the same as the year prior. They've got to address the defense. And the Justin Faulk one, why I find it so interesting is because it tells me that the Blues view Matt Kessel as a top four defenseman.
Agreed.
You're not considering moving a guy that has been named multiple times by Doug Armstrong as a leader unless you feel like you've got a replacement for him. Now, I don't think it's bad to have a Justin Faulk on your third pair. I think he could be a great defenseman. But to me, the Blues seemingly want this top four to look like left-handed defenseman name here, Nick Leddy, Colton Parayko, Matt Kessel. And you adjust from there. And it makes sense that these are the guys that at least have considered waiving their no-trade clauses, because if you look at the landscape, your no-trade becomes modified next year, which means you don't have a say in half of the teams you're going to go to. And if you're these guys, don't you at least slightly look at what happened to Barclay Goodrow with the Rangers and consider, man, I don't want that to happen to me and end up in a place that I don't want to be. So now you get to the point where it's like, yeah, you know what, I'll consider it.
And I like what you said there about, maybe you have Faulk on that third pair at $6.5 million. I think what they're telling you with this report, with their actions and what they're probably doing right now in Vegas, trying to get maybe deals done, is, okay, we don't view Krug or Faulk as a top four defenseman, and it's okay to have one of those guys as a $6.5 million third pairing defenseman. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're going to be able to move both of these guys. I'd be shocked if they moved both Krug and Justin Faulk at this year's deadline. But I will say, if you can move one of them, it makes it a little easier to stomach $6.5 million on that third pair. And if that means it's Justin Faulk on the right side and Matt Kessel's in that second pairing, and you just have to figure out who is either on that second pairing with him or is on the top pairing with Parayko on the left side, that makes sense from the St. Louis Blues perspective. Even though $6.5 million is still a lot with the cap going up for a third pairing defenseman, it's a little easier to stomach, one, in a retool, and two, if you don't have two of them. You don't want two guys at $6.5 million on that third pairing. It's okay to probably have one in the midst of a retool.
I think you can win with a player like Justin Faulk as a third pair defenseman because he is a guy who can play stingy defense for you, but he's a two-way defenseman. This doesn't mean to be a shot at Torrey Krug, but I'm not sure you can win with that if you're not hitting your ceiling with the point totals. Like, if you're not a power play specialist, if you're not putting up 50 to 60 points, then there's not really a role for you. And how much they believe Scott Perunovich still has an upside, that even makes it less of a role for you if they want more ice time for a Scott Perunovich. So it makes sense that we've gotten to that point. Now, go ahead.
Quick to that, because you just said that, this allows, if you're going to give Perunovich ice time on that, I'm assuming third pairing would be my guess.
Yeah.
Now it allows you to see, okay, this is the final prove-it year for Scott Perunovich. You got that one-year deal worth whatever it was, $1.5 million.
Now you're getting 18-plus minutes a night.
Now you're getting minutes in 5-on-5, and also now you can be the number one quarterback on the power play. Let's see what it looks like. This is the final chance for Scott Perunovich to try and live up to what he was when he got drafted by the St. Louis Blues. Okay, here you go. We're freeing up the spot for you. You're going to be the guy that's on the third pairing. We're going to lock in your spot here, and we're going to lock in your spot at the number one power play if you're able to move Torrey Krug. That is what will be interesting is, okay, can you see Scott Perunovich take that next step if they're able to free up this cap space, free up this spot on the roster for him?
There's a lot of teams that are freeing up cap space right now, which makes this even more interesting. What doesn't make sense is what our guest at 1 o'clock put out there last night. This is from our good buddy David Pagnotta from the fourth period. Quote, Colton Parayko's name is starting to make rounds again, though he has a full no-trade clause and will have a big say if the Blues try to trade him. I love me some David Pagnotta, and we're going to ask him about this at 1 o'clock today. But this is just absurd. We can stop with the Colton Parayko's name's in the trade room. I can guarantee you Colton Parayko's name is not in the trade room.
Oh, no, I bet it is. But I'm sure when the phone is getting answered, the response is go to hell.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, other teams are calling about him. Colton Parayko's name is not on the trade block.
Exactly.
Yeah. Colton Parayko is getting called about saying, hey, we'd love Colton Parayko, and it's what Grant said. Bleep off. Hang up. Yeah. For $6.5 million, he just outplayed a dude that's making $9.5 million that was on a Stanley Cup final team.
Yeah.
Not happening.
I'm with you. It's not happening, and he's like one of the, 3-4 untouchables on the Blues roster. It's him. I'd say Benner, maybe Hofer if you wanted to throw him in there, but maybe listen to that.
I think the
Thomas and Neighbors/Cairo.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's the 5 guys that are untouchable. Everybody else, Army would answer your phone call. Krug, clearly. Faulk, clearly. Nick Leddy, probably. Looking at the forward side, Brandon Saad, he would probably answer your phone call and see what you're willing to offer. Pavel Buchnevich, maybe if they don't have a contract extension in place. But I can guarantee you, Colton Parayko, he's getting phone calls about him. He's not going to entertain any kind of offer for him.
He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. Again, we'll talk with David Pagnotta coming up at 1 o'clock today. He is out in Vegas for the night of the draft. Plenty more draft conversation and Blues conversation coming your way throughout the day today. Of course, we're up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Our Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. Coming up next, Cardinals got shellacked last night by the Cincinnati Reds with Miles Mikolas on the mound. And the whole time I'm watching that game last night, I'm thinking, this might have been a blessing for the Cardinals. I'll explain next here on 101 ESPN.
over right center, splashes down base hit. India rips through second and rolls all the way to the track. India given the green light, whipped around third. De La Cruz steaming for third base. India scores Ribby triple. 1-0 Reds. Picks off the bag, fair ball. Windmill on at third. Steer rips around and scores. Martini speeds into second. An RBI done. Mikolas north of 90 pitches, enduring his worst day of the year. Hard ground ball, fair. Benson sprints for third. He rounds and scores. Fairchild to second. Throw there is late. Another Reds double. And a 9-2 annihilation in the opener of this series.
Annihilation, I think, is a perfect example of what took place last night at Busch Stadium. 11-4 the final score as the Cincinnati Reds score at least a run in the first 5 innings against the Cardinals. Miles Mikolas goes 4 1/3, 12 hits, 10 runs, 9 of them earned, 1 walk and 1 strikeout as the Cardinals fall. Of course, after I put the freaking hat on yesterday, T-Bone.
It was due, man.
You put it on, and I swear the BKO energy comes off of this and transfers to somebody else.
Look, I had a feeling that they were going to lose that game. Not that bad, but, A, me being in attendance. B, you putting on the conductor hat.
It's true. I was also in attendance.
Storm. Yeah, it was like the perfect storm for things to go south. I wasn't expecting it to go that bad because that game was never really competitive last night.
Not at all. But look, I'm not going to make a bold statement and jump off the train with this one.
I think it's the beginning of the end.
This happens. Like, you're going to have these games. I'm starting to sound like BK, but if you take 3 or 4, you forget about this one. But there was something watching that last night, T-Bone, that I really thought that what took place in that game was a blessing for the Cardinals. Because in the past, the Cardinals seem to have this false sense of hope that where they see somebody do well for 4 to 8 weeks and it's thinking, oh, well, this guy's going to be great for us. And then that changes your decisions at the trade deadline of, well, we don't need X because Y is pitching well for us. Or if we're not going to go trade for this guy because our bullpen looks good in this spot. Mikolas didn't get hurt in that game, and I'm not asking for him to get hurt. Mikolas has been very good for this team in the last 8 starts. But that game, to me, if I'm John Mozeliak sitting up in the press box watching that game last night, I'm thinking, this is why we have to upgrade over Mikolas and Gibson. This is why our trade deadline cannot be going to get somebody who's on the same level as Kyle Gibson. To me, that showed the inconsistency of Miles Mikolas. It's what I feared when we were talking about how well he was pitching in this stretch. Because last year he did this, where it was 6 to 7 weeks where he was looking very solid and you were thinking, whoa, he's figured it out. And then he fell off again. Now, he'll get right, even if he goes through a little bit of a slump. But you can't rely on Miles Mikolas to be your Game 2 starter of a playoff series. You can't rely on Kyle Gibson to be your Game 2 starter of a playoff series. You've got to be aggressive at the deadline because of what Mikolas did last night and say, we've got to get somebody so that Mikolas and Gibson are fighting to get Game 3 starts.
Yeah, I'm totally in line with you, and I felt that way before Mikolas's kind of blow-up last night. Even though he's been good of late, I mean, you made reference to his 8 starts where he had a 3.17 ERA and somehow held opponents to a 193 batting average.
Wild.
Problem is he just doesn't have enough swing and miss.
Yeah.
And you desperately need that in the playoffs. It's why teams search for it, because when you look at those starts in that 8-game stretch, he struck out 35 batters. He was averaging 4 strikeouts in those starts. Like, you just need a little bit more from your guy, because when he does miss, if he does have an off night like he did last night, he's not getting away with mistakes. You saw what happened when mistakes were made last night. The Reds were just able to pummel him, hit a bunch of extra base hits, multiple doubles, a triple, a home run. That happens with a pitcher that pitches to contact. And again, I don't think that's going to be Mikolas moving forward. I'm kind of with you. That's a blip on the radar. Just some weird stuff happened last night. These kind of games happen. And for Kyle Gibson, his last start, kind of understandable as well. He had it felt like 10 days off before between outings because of his back locking up, so it made sense. But again, when you look at Kyle Gibson, he's got nice stuff. He's a good, really number 3 starter probably for this team in the playoffs. And Mikolas probably a really good number 4 for you to have in the playoffs. Are you going to be favored when those guys take the mound? Probably not, but they can give you a fighting chance. And it's just right now they're being asked to pitch 1 spot ahead of where they should. Gibson should probably be the 3. Mikolas / Lynn should be kind of that 4, what you're looking at. You need to go upgrade at that 2 spot. You need to go find somebody that has some serious swing and miss stuff that can really be a difference maker once you get to October.
You need to find your Robin to your Batman.
Yeah.
Like, you've got your Batman right now in Sonny Gray, because every time he steps on the mound, even if we get upset with him going 80 to 85 pitches, I was talking with someone yesterday who basically said that's Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray knows he is elite up until about 90 pitches, and that's where you want him to stay. And I'm okay with that. If I know that 85 pitches means I'm going to get the best stuff from Sonny Gray, I'm cool if you want to be done after that, because your bullpen should be able to take care of it. You'd like to see it go a little bit deeper, but I can't judge that in June. I can judge that in September and October. You just don't have your Robin to that. It goes from Batman to what are we going to do at this point? I love Kyle Gibson. I think Kyle Gibson has been a savior for this team this season because you did not have him last year. You did not have that type of pitcher who not only can give you innings, but could go out there and be competitive from start to finish. I take what happened with the last start with exception. But you just don't have that other guy. That I'm not asking for Garrett Crochet. I'm asking for somebody that when he takes the mound, I don't wonder, is this going to be a really good start, or is he going to get blown up by the second inning?
Yeah, and Gibson's lost some of that because that's kind of how I felt about him early on in the year. Now I feel pretty good about him, but again, I feel good about him as a 3. The other reason that I've been saying this for, it feels like the last couple of weeks, the other reason you need to go out and get a number 2, or a guy that's pitching like a number 2 this year, like Eric Fetty, someone of that ilk, my boy Yosei Kikuchi of the Toronto Blue Jays, is because look at what happened to Philadelphia last night. And look, it's early in the season; these guys are going to come back. But if this was September and they just lost Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber to muscle injuries, because both those guys left last night's game and are probably going to miss some time, all of a sudden you go from looking at your rotation, if it was Sonny Gray and insert number 2 versus Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, and you say, okay, we now have a fighting chance. Because if injuries do pop up, and they will pop up by the time you get to October, just like that, somebody can go from being a contender to a pretender.
Right.
And I think you've seen that last year with the Atlanta Braves. You know, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, they got into the playoffs, and their injuries weren't on the position player side, it was on the pitching side, where Strider was coming off of, I think, an illness. Max Fried would just come off and hadn't really even started for a while because he was dealing with an injury. Those are the kind of things to where if you can at least set yourself up better for October by getting that Robin to your Batman, all of a sudden, if one injury does occur, you can suddenly look at yourself and go, okay, now we have a better chance if we ran into this team, the Philadelphia Phillies, or if we ran into the Dodgers, or if we match up with the Atlanta Braves in October once we get there. That's why you need to go out and get a number 2, because right now you just would not – you would have a chance, but it would be like one of those where I look at the other team and say, yeah, they're always going to be favored when you line up with them.
Yeah. So the other thing from the game last night after the loss was, Mikolas, the game was already out of hand by that point. Even if the Cardinals offense could try and pull them back in, it just felt over. What you were hoping for was not have to burn your entire bullpen there, because if it's, 8 runs, then you could use a position player, which I think Ollie said that they had Brandon Crawford getting ready to play the position.
Crawford was not only was he going to pitch, he was also warming up in the bullpen. He was getting loose.
He was getting loose out there.
He was throwing hard, too. It wasn't a bunch of eephus pitches.
But then, the Cardinals.
And Carlson actually did a good thing.
Way to go, man.
And then we had to burn another bullpen run. But hey, good news. They're going to, apparently, according to reports, according to our Cardinals insider, Katie Wu, they are planning to select the contract of one of their top pitching prospects, Gordon Graceffo.
That's what I was going to reference, because you saw Gallegos in that game, 1 2/3, which looked fine. So, that's at least a good start. But the reason you're bringing up Graceffo, and this was Katie's tweet yesterday, according to The Athletic, initial plan is to use Gordon Graceffo in relief to help alleviate a taxed bullpen. So you're bringing him up. You had to use Fernandez last night. Who knows with JoJo Romero right now? This bullpen is starting to get worn down a little bit. This is an interesting move because Gordon Graceffo, his last 3 starts for Memphis, he has gone a total of 16 innings, giving up 3 earned runs and only 3 walks with 15 strikeouts. His last 2, he has not given up an earned run with 11 strikeouts. So this guy is at least starting to shape into the starting pitcher, and they're bringing him up here to use in the bullpen. Now, don't start hitting the panic button and start complaining about the Cardinals ruining another pitcher. They've done this in the past. And I don't expect him to be in the bullpen from now until the end of the season. It's right now. Let's see what your pitches look like against major league talent. And if they look good, now you could start to consider do we use your bullpen for the rest of the season and then get you back to starters, or do we get you back to Memphis to stay in rotation?
Yeah, my guess, he's going to come out of the pen. It sounds like he's going to be up in the pen tonight. And honestly, they need that because this bullpen is fried currently, especially since they had to use Fernandez last night when they clearly didn't want to. I think what's going to be interesting to see is, I remember we had the cut when Mo talked to the bloggers. And Mo had said, hey, we think Graceffo's the kind of guy that can play out of the bullpen. And they seem to have been kind of hinting at he can probably be a bullpen arm for them moving forward. Yes, he's been pitching very well as a starter. I'm fascinated to know how this goes when he comes out of the pen for the St. Louis Cardinals, because it allows you for if you are going to become a bullpen arm, it allows for your stuff to play up a little bit. You can go more max effort rather than trying to pace yourself in a start. And the other thing is he's only come out of the bullpen 3 times in the last 3 seasons, and he's only done it, I think it's 13 times or 12 times in his entire minor league career, which is 4 seasons.
Yep.
So I'm interested to know what his stuff looks like here at the big league level and how he plays out of the bullpen, because currently he is stretched out. But I wouldn't be shocked if he looks really good. He kind of molds into what they had Chris Roycroft doing, which was, okay, go and throw, 2 innings at a time. Let's see you come out of the pen, be kind of a guy that can kind of be I don't know if I'd call him a swingman, but more of a 2-inning reliever. Yeah. That way you have more of those guys. Arm. Yeah, you got more of those guys as options, because right now you've got a couple of guys that can do that in your pen.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. They can't call Roycroft up because they have to wait the certain amount, but he was the 27th man, so they should be able to use him.
No, he cannot come up. Now,
even
it doesn't
as the
count
27th man?
They don't need a 27th man today.
No, but what I'm saying is you have to wait a certain amount of days, right, if you call somebody up and send them back down?
Yeah, but it will be back to the last time he got set down, not for the 27th man, because that doesn't count against it. But I'm interested to know what they do. I think for the 40-man, I don't think matches on the 60-day. I could be wrong, but I wonder if they will move him to the 60-day IL to free up a 40-man spot, because they probably don't want to get rid of that catcher that's on there now just while Herrera is still hurt. Otherwise, you'd have to go out and add somebody else. Yeah, my guess is they'll move Matz to the 60-day, select the contract to Graceffo. Now, who they send down, I really don't know. My guess is probably Leahy.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is he's probably fresh now.
I was going to say he's an arm that you can use. Yeah, but maybe you're offsetting Leahy with somebody who can eat 2 to 3 innings for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be curious to know what the move is for the 26-man. The 40-man one feels simple to me. You move Steven Matz to the 60-day and select his contract. I don't know what they're going to do in terms of what they want with the 26-man. It's going to be something to keep an eye on as we get closer to game time.
So the Cards are back in action tonight. 7:15 first pitch. It's Andre Palante going against Frankie Montas for the Cincinnati Reds. And we'll get more into some Cardinals talk a little bit later on. We also got Ask Us Anything today at about 15 minutes or so. You send us any type of question. We'll answer it for you. Ask Us Anything. 314-399-9646. But I do want to get back into the hockey side, because the Predators made a move yesterday while the trophies were being handed out. The Predators locked up their goaltender. And they've also done a lot of things that's gotten them to the point that they can be more aggressive. Can the Blues emulate that? We'll discuss next here on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Reds took it to the Cardinals last night, 11-4, the final, as the Cardinals dropped the opener of that series against Cincinnati. Miles Mikolas had a rough start, 4 1/3 innings, 12 hits allowed, and 9 earned runs. Cardinals will look to get back on track tonight against the Reds at Busch Stadium. It'll be Frankie Montas for the Reds going against Andre Palante for the Cardinals. Tonight for the Blues, it'll be the first round of the NHL draft. St. Louis is slated to pick 16th overall at the Sphere in Vegas. The draft will start at 6 o'clock. And this weekend for City SC, they will be in Vancouver to take on the Whitecaps, who are 7-4-7 on the season. City looking to win their 4th match of the year and record a victory for the first time since May 11th. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario, as it is BK and Ferrario from 11 to 2 today here on 101 ESPN, up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Coming up in our next segment, we'll get to Ask Us Anything, or you send us a question and we'll give you an answer, 314-399-9646. But the Nashville Predators made some news last night, of course, approaching tonight's round 1 of the draft. They're basically in every trade free agent conversation because they've got like $60 million to work with, and Barry Trotz has said that they're going to be aggressive to get them back into a winning window. And last night, they re-signed Yusei Saros to a 8-year contract extension worth $7.75 million. And that is a season after the Nashville Predators essentially told their fans, we're going to be in a competitive rebuild. We're going to start from the ground floor and build our way back up. Now, they still had Roman Josi. They still had Philip Forsberg. Those are 2 of the greats at each position. But then they went out there and they signed Ryan O'Reilly, who a lot of people thought was probably on the backside of his success. 4 years at $4.5 million.
I thought that too.
T-Bone was with him. I think Toronto did. And then they also signed Luke Schenn, who has kind of been a journeyman over these last few years, but he provides a veteran presence. 3 years at $2.75 million. Those moves alone helped that team make the playoffs last season, and now they're in a position where they want to go even further. The Blues can really take a lot from what the Predators did last year in terms of trying to emulate what they accomplished. And this goes to what Curbs told us on Wednesday, T-Bone, of, you know, this might be the year that you make more Jason Arnott type of moves, where you bring in some veteran presence that can help to move along these younger players. And once you get that winning mindset and culture back, then the following year, you turn into what the Nashville Predators are, to where now we've got money to work with, we've got internal talent, and let's surround that with guys that can take us to the next level. I don't know who those guys are. I've made it very clear that David Perron would be priority number 1 for me, because that's a winger that could work with my younger guys. If you're talking about moving out your defensemen, you're maybe bringing in other veteran presence. There's a lot that the Predators have done over the last 2 years that I do believe the Blues should look at and say, how do we try and accomplish this?
I'm with you 100% of, I would love to see them bring in 1 or 2 veteran guys, whether that be, probably forward would be definitely one of them, and maybe defensively if you move on from somebody like a Torrey Krug, which we talked about in the opening segment. But I think that these teams that are in a transition, in a retool, I think you really need some veteran guys that really have been through the ringer. Look, the Blues do have some of them. Like, they've got Braden Shen, they've got Brandon Saad, but there's a chance that Brandon Saad could be even dealt here the next couple of days. You know, there's a chance he could be dealt at the trade deadline this offseason. The reason I like having veteran guys, and we've talked about this before, of with any sport, when you have a bunch of young guys, when things start to kind of snowball on them, younger players don't necessarily know how to get out of that. And when you think about where the Blues are going in this retool, where you've got Robert Thomas, who's now more of a veteran, same with the Jordan Kyrou, but Zach Bolduc will be getting his first full season here in the NHL. Scott Perunovich, still a very young defenseman. Matt Kessel, very young defenseman. Zach Dean, if he's here. Dvorsky, if he's here with the Blues. Like, they are getting now into that next wave of Blues hockey with Thomas and Kyrou still as the pillars for them. I think it would be helpful to have another veteran in here, because those guys can help a team know that, hey, when it is snowballing, here's what we still need to be doing. Here's how we prevent this from really getting away in the season, kind of disappearing from us. And if you want to be competitive in a retool, it doesn't hurt to go out and look to try and upgrade your bottom six still on the forward side. Trying to add someone to that third line that can really help you. I really like the idea of bringing in David Perron, who you said, and I saw The Athletic had a contract projection for him earlier today, and it was like a 2-year, 2x4, or $2.35 million deal.
I would do that in a heartbeat.
I'd do that in a heartbeat if you could bring him back here, because he would significantly help this team.
Let me read some of these names to you guys and tell me. Now, Grant, you don't answer because you probably know these, but like T-Bone, tell me if you know who this is.
That's not fair. I probably don't.
Thomas Novak.
No.
Colton Sissons.
No.
Cody Glass.
No.
Mark Jankowski.
No.
Luke Evangelista.
No.
I just read to you the top 9, the second and third lines for the Nashville Predators last year. That team made the playoffs. Now, O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg were a massive reason why. That's why I look at this and say, like, if you just project what the roster looks like to try and emulate what the Predators do, and understand it's not as easy as just going out there and bringing in veterans, because they have freaking Roman Josi. You don't have that. But you look at what your top 9 is, you've got a lot of younger players. You've got potentially a Dvorsky, a Bolduc, a Jake Neighbors. And yes, you have veterans and Braden Shen and certain guys that have been there, done that. But it's also to bring in the talent with it. And I think that's the part that Nashville found a way to capitalize on. You not only brought the presence that could avoid bad droughts, but you also brought in guys who could bring the team up with their talent level. And that's what I think the Blues have to find a way to be creative with.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the Predators do have some elements of their team that the Blues just frankly don't have, like that number 1 defenseman in Roman Josi. The Blues don't have a defenseman that's that caliber of defenseman. And they've got almost a 50-goal scorer in Philip Forsberg that the Blues don't have that yet. They haven't had a player that reached almost 50 goals on this team yet. But something that the Blues should also take notes from with Nashville is you got to have addition by subtraction, and they did that with Matt Duchene.
That's a great point.
That was the first
and
big
Johansson.
thing. Yeah, a good point as well. That was the first big thing they did. They bought out Matt Duchene. They got rid of Johansson, and that allowed them to make room for these players that you're talking about that came in and played well. They had a lot of depth, and when you look at the Blues, it might not be on the forward side that they need to do that, but defensively, we've been talking about it for a long time now with Krug and Faulk. That's where the Blues could really look at taking notes from Nashville. You got to add by subtraction by doing something like Nashville
and
did.
they're in a really interesting spot, the Blues are, because, like, yes, I know we talk about how this is longer than we're giving it credit for, but I mean, what Nashville did was they got rid of those contracts. Now, they had somebody take on 50% of Ryan Johansson's contract, Colorado, and they took on 50%. And, of course, they bought out Matt Duchene. So that's going to sting on them for the next 5 years. But that opened up the ability to have $26.3 million in cap space. If you're able to pull off what JR is reporting, and if you missed that from the beginning segments, you know, JR's reporting that the Blues have at least approached Torrey Krug about waiving his no trade clause, and they've gotten 6 teams according to JR. That's how you go from one season of saying, like, yeah, we're still in this retool, but then by next year, if you take that step, you're in a position to where now you can add competitive players and put more money into it that work with your younger players. That's how you get out of this quicker. And I think Nashville's one of those teams that is about to do that.
Well, and the other thing with eating cap right now that applied to the Predators and could apply to the Blues is that for the Predators, you named all those players that came in that they weren't really big names, but they contributed in a big way. Those players aren't going to break the bank. Those are depth players that produced for you. If the Blues can do that, they can eat some salary and then bring in some depth players. They have a lot of young players that are going to be coming up, players like Jake Neighbors that are pretty cost controlled because they're under contract of, you know, young players, and they're not going to make a ton of money, restricted free agents. Like, they're going to have a lot of those players coming down the line with these prospects in the system. So if you eat salary, that's not necessarily going to hurt you so bad because you're going to have a lot of light contracts when it comes to AAV.
Can I complain a little bit, guys?
What's your complaint about?
Well, I don't know if you guys were
The
watching.
weather, it is kind of warm.
Well, no, you know, it's not too bad right now. My house is still hot, though. Thanks to Classic Air Care, though, I'll get that fixed.
Nice.
The Vezina voting last night. Anybody watch the NHL awards?
I was at the Cardinal game, watched them get their butt handed to them.
I mean, I was watching the Cardinals game. There was a lot other things on, but I'm watching on Twitter. How in the hell do the voters of the Vezina Trophy, the best goaltender in the NHL, look at all of the goaltenders that were out there and say, Jordan Binnington doesn't deserve a vote? Charlie Lindgren, Chucky Sideburns, everybody's favorite Chucky Sideburns, he got a Vezina vote. kind of tells me that the Washington Capitals writer that votes was like, you know what? Charlie Lindgren was pretty good. Now, one vote for Jordan Binnington. Like, Grant's right. We should have had an emergency call with Greg Wyshynski today and just had him come on and talk about how it's pure robbery that he didn't get a vote. Now, was he going to win it? No. Connor Hellebuck won it. I think he should have been top 3, but not even in the top 8 of votes? Come on now. This voting is getting out of hand.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was shocked that he didn't get a Vezina vote, and I'm not even saying a first place vote, just a vote in general for the Vezina, second, third. He was fantastic this season, and you look at his numbers, his goals saved above expected was some of the tops in the league. You look at just the generic numbers, if you like that, 913 save percentage, 2.84 goals against allowed in front of the Blues defense. Binnington had a really good season, and again, I wasn't saying someone should have voted for him for first for Vezina. I don't think he should have gotten a first place vote, but not to get a single vote at all in Vezina ballots is just unbelievable to me.
He should have been top 5.
I agree.
He's a top 5 goaltender in the league.
I agree.
I was looking this up on Money Puck earlier. Goals saved above expected for this season. Alex, would you say that Sergei Bobrovsky and Igor Shesterkin are good goaltenders?
Yeah, I'd say they're some of the best, hence the Stanley Cup championship that one's holding.
They had fewer goals saved above expected than Jordan Binnington did this season. And some of the voters that were high on the list, UC Saros, -3 goals saved above expected this season.
Hey, you know what? At least I took some justice in the fact that Alexander Georgiev didn't get a damn vote, too.
That was
Because
nice.
if that guy would have gotten a vote over Binnington, I probably would have said an F word on the radio right now. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, we'll get to Ask Us Anything. You send us a question, whatever you want. We'll give you an answer coming up next. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646 on BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN.
you've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers.
Presented by Window World St. Louis.com. Simply the best for less.
314-399-9646. That is our Air Comfort Service text line. Also our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Our studio cams brought to you by the Air Alliance team. Along with T-Bone and Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. As we get to Ask Us Anything, you send us a topic, whatever you want us to discuss, and we'll get into that here on BK and Ferrario. Let's start with this one from the 314. If someone were to say, take Torrey Krug, let me rephrase this one for the texter. If someone was to say that they'd take Torrey Krug and our first round pick, we don't have to retain anything on Torrey Krug. You get rid of the $6.5 million and you trade your 16th overall pick. Would you do it? Absolutely not. I'll eat 40% of the contract. I'm not trading a 16th overall pick to just get rid of a defenseman. I'll put him through waivers. I can't give up an asset just like that. I'll give up a second or a third round pick if I have to, because I've got multiple of those. I'm not giving up a 16th overall pick that could be a top line player or a top 4 defenseman for me.
I think I'm with you. I don't think I would attach your first round pick to Torrey Krug, just because I still think the Blues, and Army kind of hinted at this when he had his media availability before the draft. What was that, last week, 2 weeks ago? They still kind of feel like they're in asset collection mode. You know, they still want to have these draft picks that are in the first round and still be drafting in the mid-teens to, hopefully not in the top 10 again, but they still want to be collecting some of these first-round picks, drafting these guys, and then going from there. So I would say no. I don't think I would do it either.
Yeah, I'm with you. That feels like similar to what Steve Yzerman just did with the Jake Wallman trade.
Yeah.
Like trading Jake Wallman to a team, attaching a draft pick to him, and not getting anything in return but future considerations, when it's likely that teams out there would have been interested in Wallman. He just had a pretty good season for Detroit.
Yeah.
It felt like a desperation move. That would feel like a desperation move, moving your pick and Torrey Krug just to not retain salary. And to not get a first-round pick and a player that, if you look 5, 6, 7 years down the road and there's a player that was picked in that area, picked 16th overall, that's really producing, and the Torrey Krug contract is gone, and you're looking at that like, man, we could have had that, then you're regretting that move big time.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a left-handed defenseman that profiled as a top pair defenseman available via free agency, then I'd consider it, because I'd say go throw all the money at that guy, just get rid of the $6.5 million. But there's not, and I would much rather take that shot with six. There's legit dudes, which I'll have a Ferrario 5 a little bit later on today. There's legit guys that can be top 4 pair defensemen at 16, so I'm not moving that one. From the 314, guys, Stamkos will be a free agent. Does he fit the Blues?
No. He doesn't fit in terms of, one, he probably, my guess, wants to go to a contender. And 2, I don't remember what the number was. I heard somebody report yesterday he's still probably looking for like $6 million AAV.
Oh, yeah, he's going to get 7+.
Yeah, 6 to 7, somewhere in that range, even more potentially. If that's the case, it doesn't fit for the Blues, even though they have money, but he just doesn't fit the time frame of where they are also in their life cycle. You don't really need to bring in Stamkos. We talked about bringing in veteran leadership, and yes, he fits into that category, but we're talking more of the smaller deals, the 1-2 year deals, kind of like what David Perron is looking for. Stamkos will be 34 years old before he signs this next contract. Blues are looking for guys that are more in their mid-20s than guys that are in their late 30s. And again, Stamkos probably wants to go play for somebody that has a chance at a cup.
Yeah, I agree. Stamkos to me kind of feels like Patrick Kane when, he was moved to the Rangers and then signed in Detroit. I probably wants to go to a winner, and really winners are going to be the only ones that are going to be interested in him. That's a player that can put you over the hump rather than push you through a retool.
Or a team that needs help on their power play.
Yeah.
A team that needs help on the power play, that's who you go after, and you don't have to give up as much. But the problem is he's got to agree to go to that team, because most of the time you're going to get teams that, like Detroit, I really think he'd be interested in. I don't know if Detroit would be interested in having him for 3 years at $6.5 million.
You know who should go after Stamkos, in my opinion? Carolina.
If they don't get Gensel, I agree with that. If they don't get Gensel, absolutely would go get that. And Vancouver's the other one.
Yeah.
If I'm Vancouver, I'd consider it also. Okay, a couple more to get to. Are you guys fans of promoting AAA starters to put in the bullpen, losing someone who is stretched out for emergencies? This is what the Cardinals used to do this, if I'm not mistaken. They did this with Lance Lynn, right?
Yeah, but I'd have to go back and double check. They used to do it, though, like late in the year. Like,
Yeah, it was like September.
Yeah.
Lynn, I think, came up. Yeah, he played 18 games for the Cardinals in 2011 and then was a part of their team.
My guess is that was in late.
That had to be the September call-ups.
Or it could have, like, maybe even August. Let's see here.
Yeah.
But because typically what happened was the minor league season would end. He had a little time. Well, they called him up sooner than I thought.
Really?
He was called up in July. And he's called up in June, started a couple games, and got moved to the pen for July and August. But typically it would have been more of late in the season when you would try this. I don't necessarily mind this because what it is the Cardinals are saying, okay, we don't think he's got the stuff to be a big league starter to eat 5-6 innings, but we do think he can maybe pitch in 1 or 2 small inning sample sizes when he can kind of go max effort. So I don't necessarily have that big of a problem with it.
Yeah, I don't either. I think it's a smart move if a guy's pitching well, try and build the confidence up a little bit more. Now, what you hope doesn't happen is he gets shellacked when he comes out of the bullpen, because now I think you're going back to where you started. But, get him a little bit of taste of Major League Baseball pitching, feel what it looks like, see what it looks like, and then you build off of that. Because if you feel confident with some of your pitches at the Major League level out of the bullpen, now you've turned that into how do you look in a rotation spot for the Cardinals. And again, if you missed us talking, that's Gordon Graceffo. We're referencing who Katie Wu reported yesterday could be called up today to be a part of the bullpen that has been used an awful lot lately. Thank you, everybody, for our text messages. Coming up next, Jamie said something yesterday on the Fast Lane about Pavel Buchnevich and the contract extension conversation. If he doesn't sign one, do you just consider holding on to that up until the trade deadline? T-Bone and I have some thoughts we'll get into next here on 101 ESPN.
If you can't get your number, then if I'm Army, I'm walking into the season saying you got 1 year, you're on your last year.
Yeah. Why not trade him this offseason then?
You probably need him. Like, if you're going to continue this retool and heading in the right direction, a guy like Pavel Buchnevich is going to play a big part in it. And if he's only got 1 year left on his deal, he's going to be highly motivated, too.
True.
So you see where he can get your group by the trade deadline. If you're solidified in the playoffs, then maybe you talk extension with Pavel Buchnevich at that point, at Christmas or whatever it is, right? All-Star break. Or if the team is not in the playoffs, now you move him for whatever you can get, and you've used his abilities for, almost 3/4 of the season.
So that was Jamie Rivers yesterday on the Fast Lane with Kerry Davis and Andrew Marsh talking about the Pavel Buchnevich contract extension. And, of course, we haven't heard any news on that, mostly because he can't sign an extension until July 1st. They're not supposed to have salary talks, but we all know what goes on behind closed doors, a lot of things that you're not supposed to do. But regardless, you won't hear about anything with Pavel Buchnevich of a contract extension until July 1st. And we've talked a lot about it. Craig Button was on with us yesterday that essentially said, I'm not going past 5 years with Pavel Buchnevich, because by then you're talking about probably the best years behind him, and that's typically when you're going to hopefully be in a winning window. And I look, there are teams that do what Jamie is saying. I mean, the Blues just did it with Vladimir Tarasenko. They had the almost 40-goal season, if not the 40-goal season, for Vladdy the year prior to him getting traded, and they thought, well, he's going to give us our best shot to win a Stanley Cup if we can't get what we want for him, and they held on to him. That team scuffled. They traded him at the trade deadline the next year, and he had to get traded with somebody else to get a first-round draft pick that was 23 or 25, I think, in last year's draft. That's why I would not do that. I would not hold on to Pavel Buchnevich if he's not willing to sign the contract extension, because I don't know what you're trying to accomplish with Buch. Now, I know what Jamie's saying, because, he does make you a better team this season regardless of who you get in return, because it's highly unlikely you're going to get somebody of the ilk that Pavel Buchnevich is. Apparently, if Martin Necas is going for a 4th overall pick, I don't think you're getting a 1-for-1 swap of these two guys, especially if he's not willing to sign a contract extension. But keeping Buch here for 1 year doesn't do anything for you. You might have the opportunity to at least get higher up in the draft, get a higher level prospect, because that team is going to get a full season of Pavel Buchnevich. Look at what happened with Timo Meier. Timo Meier was held on to up until the trade deadline because San Jose didn't know what they were going to do, and they traded him. He was a UFA like Buch was. Now, he was younger, but he went for the equivalent of 2 first-round draft picks and a couple of other mid-level prospects. And those 2 draft picks that you got were 20th overall and 26th overall. If Buch is unwilling to sign a contract extension to my liking, I can't hold on to him, because the quality I'm going to get back in return isn't going to be less than what it could be this offseason, where there are so many teams desperate to make an upgrade to their roster. So that's why T-Bone and I have remained steadfast on, look, if he's not willing to sign the 5-year contract extension, if I'm the Blues, I got to move you now, because I need that spot that we're talking about with you to go to somebody else who's in the same time frame as our team.
Yeah, and I thought even at the time when they had Vladdy, when that happened, after he was coming off of the season in which he scored 34 goals for the Blues, and they had that good year, and he ended up being an all-star, like, okay, I understood. I thought you should have traded him, but I could at least convince myself of what they were trying to sell. Look, we've got Vladdy. He's coming off of this great year. He's going to be highly motivated. And again, what you said, they wanted to try and continue to make the playoffs and try and compete for a cup. As much as the Blues want to make the playoffs this year, and they are still trying to remain competitive, they're in a retool, and it is public that this is a retool. So if there is no deal in place for Pavel Buchnevich, if they are getting the sense that they're not going to be able to get a deal done once July 1st opens, he needs to be on the block today. He needs to be on the block tonight to potentially get some assets for the draft this year or any other swap that may occur, because he's going to have his highest value now, not at the trade deadline, but right now.
Someone brought up a really good point that you also have to consider. You are gambling when you say we're going to hold on to you and see what happens at the deadline. He has a history of getting injured. He's been injured the last 3 seasons for you. And now you're trading a dude who, let's say he gets injured in January. Now the demand goes lower. And mind you, he has a no trade clause that's modified, so you can only pick what teams you trade him to. So Right, and he's got the same trade clause now, so it doesn't change, but there are a lot more teams that look at that and say, man, this is an upgrade for us. Like Carolina, if Carolina doesn't get the 4th overall pick for Martin H's, you could go player for player. If you want a defenseman, Ottawa wants to ship out one of their defensemen. That could get you that return. Again, he's got to agree to it. But holding on to him, I just think signals disaster for this team's future.
Yeah, and I'm with you as well. Like, you talk about the Vladdy situation. They were trying to contend for a cup at the time. Right now, the Blues are trying to contend to sneak into the playoffs. They're not where they were when the Vladdy situation was going down. So I'm totally with you. I think if they're looking to trade Pavel Buchnevich, if the extension's not going to be signed, it should be right now. It should be sooner rather than later that they're looking to trade. I mean, I think about Jake Gensel and the Penguins and what just happened. The return that they got for that rental.
It was a second-round pick, wasn't it? It wasn't even a first-round pick.
2 draft picks and Michael Bunting. It wasn't a huge return.
A second-round pick and a 5th-round pick.
And Michael Bunting, right?
And Michael Bunting.
So,
and that was a guy who had 22 goals in 50 games. He was a point-per-game player when he got traded from Pittsburgh. Also coming off of a season where he had 36 goals.
Now imagine what Pittsburgh could have gotten if they would have traded Jake Gensel for a full season.
Yeah.
They would have gotten more. And I understand what Pittsburgh was doing because you're towards the end of the years of Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. You're trying to capitalize as much as possible during that time frame. But it didn't work out. And they realized that towards the end of the season, so they traded Jake Gensel. But again, if they would have traded him before the season started, they would have gotten much more rather than just a month or two of Jake Gensel.
So from the 314 texted in and said, guys, Jamie said you need him to remain competitive. And yes, that is true. You do need that you need a top 6 winger to remain competitive this year. If you trade him for a 10th overall draft pick, that's more of a rebuild. That I agree with Jamie. But I'm not saying you trade Buch right now for a draft pick. I'm saying you trade Buch right now for a position player that is going to get moved from another team. That player makes you competitive. And if you don't trade him and you keep him and you try and stay competitive, and let's say the season goes like it did this year, where you're 8 points out of a playoff spot at the trade deadline, he's not going to resign with you. So you're just going to roll the dice at the trade deadline and say, well, let's hope we make the playoffs with Pavel Buchnevich and let him walk for nothing. Or you trade him for a first-round pick to a contender that is a late first-round pick at the deadline, and then that pick isn't going to play for you for 3 to 5 years. I think there is more available to you on the table right now to move Buch. That is all with the caveat of him not re-signing. And you know what those conversations are by now. You've had those discussions. If he's not willing to sign the contract and wants an 8x8 contract, holding on to him feels like you're just setting yourself back a couple of years rather than trying to expedite this forward.
Or what could happen is say they do keep Pavel Buchnevich for this upcoming season for that final year. Okay, if they take a step forward, well, what's going to happen when Buchnevich leaves in free agency? Then you're going to take a step forward just to take a step back.
And you got nothing from him.
Yeah.
And that's where it is for me is, look, I understand that the Blues want to remain competitive, but the best thing for them right now is if Buch doesn't want to sign a contract extension or they can't agree on the term of it, maybe he wants to be here, but they can't agree on term. He wants 8 years and the Blues want 5. And look, when the Blues want something, they're not budging from it. You saw that with David Perron, for example, and Alex Pietrangelo, for example. You have to capitalize and you have to move the asset. You have to get something in return for Buch rather than letting him just walk in free agency because that's what's best for the retool. I know it would suck to say like, hey, if you trade Buch and it is just for a draft pick, it may mean the Blues are less competitive today, but it's better for them 3 years from now, 2 years from now. And that's what they're trying to do right now. They are trying to get themselves positioned to where maybe this is the year, and this is where me and BK agree on the Blues offseason of you are going to get, in my opinion, they are probably going to get worse before they get better. And this is probably one of those moves if he's not willing to come to terms on a contract extension.
And here's the other thing. As I've mentioned, there's a lot of position players that could be available. Is from David Pagnotta, who's going to join us at 1 o'clock today. Teams interested in Winnipeg's Nikolai Ehlers prefer to have a contract extension in place if they are paying the asking price. It's believed to be a young NHL forward and a first-round pick. I don't know. It doesn't sound like you'd be able to get Buch for Nikolai Ehlers, but that's another player that I think is more on the radar of the Blues, or should be on the radar of the Blues, than signing a 30-year-old to an 8-year contract extension. I mean, that's 28 years old. I get it. He's close to it, but we're talking about somebody who plays very similar style to Pavel Buchnevich. Again, what does it cost? Can you afford it? Probably not. But that's the type of moves that are available to you at the draft is if you're the Blues, then waiting to the deadline when you're talking about second-round picks that have a condition with it that maybe gets you into the first.
Yeah, and I really like Ehlers, as you mentioned him. Looking at him, he's the kind of guy that if you did bring him in, trade for him, he's a guy that would fit into your top 6. Now, he is a little bit older, and I don't know if he's older than what I think the Blues are looking for, but he's a guy that I would much rather, if you brought him in, if you did extend him on a contract, which would probably be like Buch, an 8-year deal, now you suddenly have that top line figured out for the long term, unless you don't think Kyra's a top line guy in that snug spot. But either way, that would be one of the guys in the top 6 that's on a longer term deal. When his deal would expire, he'd be like 35. Meanwhile, when you're looking at Buch, it's like 37, I think, 38, somewhere in that range. He's an interesting name, and just to pass some news along, we do have another trade in the NHL, another draft pick trade. We've seen the Canadians climb up from 26th to 21st overall. The Kings move back in a trade swap.
It's a weird thing that we're seeing that. We'll get into this at 12:30, but it's a weird thing to where these teams are trading. Like Button told us yesterday, you don't see first-round trades. We've seen 2 of them in a matter of 2 days where these teams don't know what they're getting at the position that they're picking in. So seems odd that we're getting all of that right now.
It's weird they're happening before the draft has started.
Very much so.
When the draft's going on, you kind of get a sense of, okay, this guy's available for us. Let's try and make that move. Let's try and move up and beat this team that might have him on their board as well. It's very odd to see it happening the way it is so far before the draft.
We'll get back into the draft coming up at 12:30, but coming up next, is there any situation where you would trade Jordan Walker? The opening drive discussed that, and we'll get into it next year on 101 ESPN.
only reason that I would consider it is because I don't think I have a number one starter in my system anywhere, on my 40-man or in my system. I don't think I have that guy down in the minors. You've got Gorman, who you love, apparently. You've got Noot Bar. You've got Burleson. Plus, you've got Arenado under contract through 27. So you've got bats in your system. Do you have a Jordan? Well, you don't know what the Jordan Walker bat is. And if you can get a number one quality starter, I mean, you're talking about a horse in Crochet. You're talking about a 6'6", 245-pounder. He was a first-rounder in the same draft that Jordan Walker was a first-rounder. And this year, he's dominant at the major league level. He's exactly what you're looking for. And he just turned 25 a week ago today. Those guys don't grow on trees. And if I could get a pitcher like that, because I don't have that guy in my system, 6'2", 245-pounder, that is a horse. He can be a number one.
So that was Randy Carricker today on the opening drive talking about Jordan Walker and would you trade that individual? And Randy's right. You don't have a Garrett Crochet in your system. I'm sure a lot of people at least are starting to fall in line with Randy because of how bad he's been in the minors and thinking that, well, this guy's never going to hit the potential that they made him out to be. And look, the track record for the Cardinals typically is when you hype up a prospect, it doesn't live up to expectations. But that's one dude I'm not rolling the dice on. With Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Randy listed off all of those bats that you have in the outfield and listed out Nolan Arenado. Every one of those bats he just listed off do not have the upside of what Nolan Arenado is. And I get where Randy's coming from because you're not talking about upside with Garrett Crochet. You're talking about what he's doing right now. But as we've seen, and T-Bone talks about this all the time, pitchers don't last very much. A lot of people were talking about how bad of a trade it was for Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen. And although they're right, bad trade, where's Sandy at right now? He's on Tommy John surgery, and he's out. Jordan Walker, at least, and this isn't just the Cardinals hyping him up. This is Keith Law. This is Baseball America, Baseball Prospects. They are hyping up this individual to be a superstar. And to me, although it looks bad, I mean, he went 3 for 5 yesterday, but prior to that, he went 0 for 8. Even if it's looking bad right now, for a kid who is 22 years old, you're going to have to be talking elite young pitching for me to even consider it. And even then, I don't know how much I'm considering that.
I'm not considering it at all. And Garrett Crochet fits the elite young pitching. And Randy's right. He's a number one starter. And there's a reason he's getting a bunch of buzz at this year's trade deadline as we get closer and closer to it. I'm not moving Jordan Walker. He's the only guy that is untouchable that's in the minor league system for the St. Louis Cardinals. And look, I understand that it hasn't gone exactly to plan as what people were expecting out of him. He's starting to kind of figure it out. If you look at his numbers this month for the Memphis Redbirds, 260 batting average, 784 OPS, and he's starting to slug the ball at 455. And he's hit 3 home runs, and he's now starting to get some extra base hits with 4 doubles and a triple. Though number one starters don't grow on trees, potential superstars like Jordan Walker don't grow on trees either. They're hard to find. The Cardinals have had a very long time since they developed the last homegrown potential superstar. And look, Walker is young. He hasn't shown that capability just yet, but seeing him in the second half of last year, I think once everything finally clicks for him, he's going to be a stud for the St. Louis Cardinals. And you don't move on from him. And all those names and those bats that the Cardinals do like, in a Donovan, a Gorman, Nolan Arenado, Burleson, none of those guys have superstar potential outside of Arenado if he can kind of get things figured out. But, you know, I don't know if he's going to get it figured out because he's kind of showing like he's his age at this point in his career. So for me, there's no person that you can bring up to me that I would say Jordan Walker is the guy that I'm trading that is a realistic, like, on the block. You know, sure, if you said Shohei Ohtani, yeah, okay, I would do it. But he's never going to be traded from the LA Dodgers. Garrett Crochet, I understand the hype around him. If I'm the Cardinals, I'm not trading a potential superstar, and 2, you're not in a spot for it. You know, yeah. Even if they acquire Garrett Crochet, they're still going to be the underdogs to the Philadelphia Phillies and the LA Dodgers. They're not in this like all in, push your chips into the middle mode. They're still trying to build up to that point, and they're not there yet.
I just want to squash something that we got on the text line because we had somebody text in and say, you have Chase Davis, trade Walker now for a number one pitcher. I don't know where the hype for Chase Davis has come from because I know he was a first-round pick, and I know there was a lot of hype around the power that he has. In 2 years in A-ball, which, mind you, he's the same age as Jordan Walker, and he's playing an age A-ball, a 636 OPS and a 703 OPS. And people are saying, well, he's smashing home runs. He's hit 5 so far this season in A-ball. Last year, he hit 0 in 34 games. Like, there's not another Jordan Walker in your system right now. Now, maybe somebody comes up through the pipeline in the next few years, but we're talking 3 to 4 years from now. Jordan Walker, we're talking about next year. You're hoping he's figured this one out. And I just pulled up a couple of different trades, and I'm not comparing them to the same thing, but the Dodgers traded O'Neal Cruz for Tony Watson back in 2017. Now, that was more of a, hey, we need to tighten up areas so we can win a World Series, but you traded a superstar for a pitcher, or potential superstar for a pitcher. Fernando Tatis Jr. traded for James Shields because, you wanted pitching. Again, I understand they're different situations because those teams are trying to win at the time and you're building for the future, but you don't trade a future core piece of your roster for a future pitcher for your roster, because we've seen over time that pitching does not last compared to the position player that goes on and continues success. Maybe he becomes a bust in 3 years. Somebody also texted in and said, when do you consider it? I'll consider it when we're talking 26 years old and it hasn't worked out at the major league level.
And at that point, he's not going to get you this kind of guy.
Not at 22, when prior to him going back down the season, hadn't even taken 150 at-bats at the major league level, or at the AAA level.
He's the kind of prospect, and I don't know if you'll agree or disagree with this, he's the kind of prospect because he is so highly touted and has, you can see the skills. Defensively, he's a freak athlete. That dude's huge for 22 years old. And if he can learn to, lift the ball just a little bit, I'm not saying really max out the launch angle, but just hit line drives instead of ground balls, he's going to be a stud. And the older he gets, the more he'll probably mature into some more power. He's the kind of prospect that you live or die with. He either sticks in your system and he either becomes the superstar that you thought he was going to be, or he sticks in your system and flames out and you sit on your hands and don't work. You just say, oh, well, we missed. And I know people don't want to hear that, but that's what they did with an Alex Reyes, for an example. That guy was supposed to be the next ace. And that guy's his stuff profile played that way. When he was healthy that 1 year, you saw him as a bullpen arm. You could see why the Cardinals dreamed big on him when he was in the minor leagues.
Right.
That's the kind of prospect that he either becomes the star that you're thinking, or it flames out and goes miserably in your system and it sets you back a bit. But those are the kind of guys that you just don't move on from. And especially for pitching, that yes, he would help them this year and for the years that he is controllable. But you're 100% right. Pitching breaks, and it breaks at any moment. It can go for a guy, and he's never the same guy, and you would have potentially just traded a superstar for him.
Someone also brought up a great point. People were ready to trade away Alec Burleson last year, and now he's probably viewed as an untouchable for a lot of Cardinals fans after what he's done right now. So since we're talking about the pitching breaking, which it does, especially when you're making the trades for it, but one thing the Cardinals have going for them right now, T-Bone, is something that we've criticized them about pretty much for the last few years. They have young pitching that has optimism right now. We talked about Gordon Graceffa, who seemingly has figured something out to where, yes, he's coming up in a bullpen role, but he's looked good as a starter. Quinn Matthews has been making a rise in the minor league system. I believe he was just promoted to Double-A.
And
Cooper Jerpy. And Cooper Jerpy, I think, has gone back-to-back games where he has gone 5 innings or more without giving up a run.
Yeah.
And Tink Hance, who was pitching well, got injured, and that one, of course, is up in the air. But at the beginning of the season, I didn't think you had anything coming up in the minor league system. Now, at least it seems you're starting to get more of those arms that become depth pieces that could potentially be 3s or 4s for you. I don't think you have a number 1 or a number 2 in your system, but you have guys that you can rely on, unlike last season.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You're now starting to see the next, I would call it the next wave of potential depth starters for the St. Louis Cardinals, because I'm kind of with you. Tink Hance, TK Roby, those are the guys with probably the highest ceilings, and they're in my opinion, probably highest ceiling is a 2, and maybe a 3 if they end up just kind of getting close to it, but don't really reach their full potential. But you're really seeing some good progress from a Cooper Jerpy, who recently got promoted. You mentioned Gordon Graceffa, who's going to be up with the club, was pitching well. Michael McGreevy, I saw, has been pitching better of late as well. You've got Quinn Matthews, who's looked really good. And then you've also got Ian Bedell, who they recently called up to AAA, and I'm not sure if he's made his first start yet or not, but he had been pitching really well down for the Springfield Cardinals. you're starting to see what that double-A pitching staff was, those guys that were in that high-A area of Quinn Matthews and Cooper Jerpy, the double-A guys who have recently been promoted. You're starting to see that these guys are now, okay, that's the next wave. You know, there was kind of pillars. There was the McGreevy, Graceffo, Kloffenstein, Robersay, those 4 guys who are in AAA. You said, okay, let's see what those guys are. They kind of flamed out. Now Graceffo has picked it up. McGreevy's starting to pick it up just a little bit. And then you've got that wave behind them. You're now starting to see where you can look at the Cardinals and say, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but you can see where they can look at in their system and actually say, okay, we have improved internal depth. They said that this past offseason, and we all agreed. We looked at it and went, well, what are they talking about? It's Drew Rom and Zach Thompson. And you don't feel good about Drew Rom. And as we've learned, you don't feel good about Zach Thompson. Now you're starting to see that next wave that should be ready to go, some of them by next July, I would say. And it's easy to look at the Cardinals and say, okay, I can see where you can now look at yourselves and say, there's some improved internal depth that you may have some options going into next season.
And I think the more guys that you have that are internal depth that you have improved allows you to be a little bit more aggressive at the trade deadline, because if somebody wants one of your pitchers, now it doesn't feel like you're giving up your entire crop of the minor leagues if you've got 3, 4, 5 guys that you believe have somewhat of a Major League Baseball upside. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, the asking price right now is seemingly a lot if you want to move up in the draft. So if that's not the case for the Blues, who are we talking about at 16? We'll talk about moving up in the draft, and I've got a Ferrario 5 for you next here on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Last night, the Cardinals did not fare well in Game 1 of their series with the Reds, dropping that one 11-4 to Cincinnati. Miles Mikolas struggled in his start, going 4 1/3 innings, 12 hits allowed, and 9 earned runs on the evening. Cardinals look to bounce back tonight against the Reds in Game 2 at Busch Stadium. It'll be Frankie Montas for the Reds and Andre Palante for the Cardinals. Tonight in the NHL, it's the first round of the draft in Vegas. The Blues are slated to pick 16th overall at the Sphere tonight. The draft will start at 6 o'clock. And this weekend for City SC, they will be in Vancouver battling against the Whitecaps, who are 7-4-7 this season. City's looking to win their 4th match of the year and record a victory for the first time since May 11th. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
I think Columbus is the center of the universe when it comes to potentially moving down. And there are teams out there who believe that the Blue Jackets are motivated to do something big. They would like to make a splash. Now, Pierre LeBrun had the report about Philadelphia. What I heard was Columbus wanted something big. The 12, which would have to be included because that's Philly's current pick. Philly has the 32nd pick and potentially Colorado's number 1 from next year.
So that was Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast. I had Last Minute Blues podcast in my head, which, by the way, dropped a new episode recently, so go check that one out wherever you get your podcasts from. Shout out. But Friedman is talking about the asking price for moving up in the draft. And the one that is being talked so much about right now is the Columbus Blue Jackets, because they're shopping around the 4th overall pick. You just heard him reference kind of what teams are offering. So the report has been Philly had an offer on the table that was their 12th overall pick, and then it was a 2nd pick, and then a late 1st pick next year, something like that. And Columbus turned it down. The rumor right now is Carolina's trying to get that for the Martin Necas trade. Necas for the 4th overall pick, and apparently that isn't enough to make Columbus move off of the 4th overall pick. It's too steep to trade into the top 10, at least seemingly right now. The other teams that might consider moving it, you've got the New Jersey Devils at 10 overall. You've got the Ottawa Senators. I'm not sure if they're going to move it or not, but those are the 2 teams that I could say could consider it. The one you should have made was the move that San Jose made last night. That was trading the 14th overall pick for the 11th overall pick from the Buffalo Sabres and a 2nd-round pick in this year's draft. They didn't. The price is too much for this team to move up. I'm all about it. I know I talked a lot about it, trying to get into the top 10 to get one of these defensemen. But if we're talking about Martin Necas, who's 25 years old, as an NHL-ready player, who's an RFA, that's not enough to get into the top 10, then you don't have the pieces to get into the top 10. I'm fine trading my 16th overall pick to get into the top 10. I'm not playing off of my NHL roster for young players to get into the top 10.
Yeah, and I don't even like that report of what Philly was offering, which was 3 first-round picks.
Yeah.
And say it's not going to number 4, but let's say it is still in the top 10 that you're looking to move up. It's probably going to cost you this year's first and next year's first.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I don't want to give up next year's first-round pick because I don't really know if the Blues are going to be better or worse this year. You know, it's kind of up in the air. If they could, it's very possible they take a step back and are drafting higher next year. It certainly sounds like with what the asking price is, and though we have talked about it, it definitely feels like it is, okay, we can put it to rest. If the Blues are going to move up, it would be shocking to me at this point, based on what all the reports are of what teams are seeking, especially Columbus at that number 4 spot. And I'm also wondering, and I'm assuming you feel this way too, I wonder if the Necas idea is potentially dead as well, to where if he's what Carolina's trying to offer to go get that number 4 pick, and we'll see if that ends up happening or not. Sounds like Carolina is still trying to seek out a steep asking price for Martin Necas for a trade.
That's why I'd offer sheet it. That's why I would offer sheet it, because
if you get there, that's where it'll be interesting to see.
But if he's not
trade him.
But if he's not getting traded for a 4th overall pick, I don't know what you're looking for. Now, you could move Buch for him, but again, Buch has to agree to it. Carolina's got to be on board with it. What better could you get than a 4th overall pick. I mean, they're talking 4th overall picks as somebody who could play in the NHL this year. And if you're Carolina, I'll take that because I could slow play it. I'm still a good team. I don't know if it's dead, but I would offer sheet it because I'm not making the trade for Martin Necas because of what the asking price is. I mean, look, this is not a sexy draft if you're outside of the top 10. People have made that very clear. But it's not like we're talking about NHL players and then maybe NHL players. We're just talking about the difference between top-line players versus middle players. And I don't think there's anything wrong with getting middle players if you believe the guys you have in your system right now are top players.
If you draft a guy in the first round and he ends up being, I don't know, a third liner, for example, third pairing defenseman, you know what I'd call that, especially drafting like the middle rounds, to your point, a win. You know, like I know everybody
getting a consistent NHL player in the first round, that's a win.
I know everybody wants like a first round pick to be like, well, he's got to be a superstar. Like if you're in the top 10, okay, then there's an argument for that. Once you get outside the top 10 in most NHL drafts, it's typically what you're talking about. Yeah. Did we get a third liner? Oh, nice.
Win!
High five. We won this pick, baby.
Yeah, like Stenberg, the guy that they drafted 23rd overall last year, projected to probably be a nice third line complimentary piece.
Yeah.
That's what you're hoping for.
Look at like Zach Dean, for example. The Blues didn't draft Zach Dean, but he was drafted.
He was a late first-round pick. I think it was like 28th or 30th.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And like best case scenario, well, I don't want to say best case scenario, like most people view him as like maybe a third line center. Mm-hmm. Again, solid win there in the first round for any team that would take that kind of a player.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's just consider that you're not moving into the top 10. There's always the possibility of moving back if the guys aren't there for you, but I'm going to give everybody their primer for tonight's NHL Draft Night 1 because I have put together, because BK basically did like a BK 50, I'm going to give you the Ferrario 100. Grant, hit my new open.
You're listening to BK and Ferrario. It's time for the Ferrario 5, a top 5 list of very random things. So, Ferrario, give us your top 5.
I'm just joking. It's only 5. I'm not going to give you 100 of them, although believe me,
I probably would have left if it was 100. Sorry.
I have done my deep dive.
I've only got another hour 15 on the clock. That probably would have taken too long.
I am going to give you a couple of honorary mentions, though, just to keep an eye on.
That's a BK.
Yeah, it's true. One guy that I don't expect to be there, but if he is there, get away to get him.
Salabrini or whatever his name is?
Yeah, if he's not there. Hey, man, if he makes it to 16, draft him.
What a fall that would be.
No, it's Carter Yakimchuk. They're basically saying he's not going to go past 12, but if for some reason he drops, I love this dude. I think he's going to be Evan Bouchard. I think he's exactly what Evan Bouchard is. He's 6'3", I think he scored 75 points in the OHL last year, and he's got the frame to be a bigger defenseman for you. So he's one to keep an eye on. There's two guys I would say keep an eye on later in the draft. Might not happen tonight, but maybe tomorrow. Adam Dzeko, who is 6'3" centerman. Actually, I think he's 6'5" centerman. And then the last name might surprise people. His name's Anis Koivu. He's Mikko Koivu's nephew, if you remember that from the Minnesota Wild.
That name sounded familiar.
So he's a depth piece that you get later in the draft, but I do like those names. Okay, now to the actual list. And the fellas over at Elite Prospects, I don't know if you follow them on Twitter. I think they do outstanding work. I've got some comps for you with these guys, so you tell me if you're on board with this. Number 5, a 6'3" right shot defenseman who is comped to Brandon Carlo of the Boston Bruins. This is their scouting report on him. A potential top 4 defenseman with top-end rush defense and plenty of speed, but will have to add more puck-moving skills to get there. E.J. Emery.
I'd be in on that.
Yeah, and they label he's a great play killer, and they say he's a hammer when he plays on defense. So
we could use all of those traits on our blue line.
Yeah, we could definitely use a player similar to Brandon Carlo, a steady defenseman.
That's what Craig Button said yesterday. Keep an eye on this kid. Like, I think he's probably going to go more towards the late teens, early 20s, but I like the idea of this one if the guys aren't there, which I'll tease you with. There's 2 defensemen on the top 2 that I think they should be going after. Number 4 on this list, and I'm going to butcher this name, Michael Brandseg Nygaard. So they label him as a comp to Arturi Lehkonen of the Colorado Avalanche right now. Two-way defenseman, or two-way forward who plays both on the offensive side. They call him a modern-day power forward with projectable physical tools across the board. The best forechecker in the entire draft.
Yeah. I'll take one of those.
Yeah. Also says he's got a sniper of a shot that has top 6 potential. He's a winger.
I love
I'm
all
on a
of
roll
that.
right now, so keep an eye on this kid.
That sounds like it would complement Dalibor Dvorsky very well.
It's funny you said that because that's exactly what I was thinking. Or even like I don't know if he'd be a top line guy, but with a Robert Thomas as well. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Go out there, get on the forecheck, possess the puck on the top line.
Your forward group is set if you've got that with already Snuggerud, Stenberg, Dvorsky, Bolduc, Neighbors. Like, you're looking really good.
An aggressive forecheck is one area where the Blues lack.
You don't have a lot of them.
When they do get to that game, they're effective, but they don't do it often.
Absolutely. Okay, number 3 on this list, Konsta Halinas. Now, I've seen this guy drop a little bit in the draft. Anywhere from like 10 to 14 is where I've seen him go, but they comp him to Elias Lindholm. And they say that this is probably the most ready player outside of selecting in the top 3 for the NHL this coming season. Now, you don't rush it if he's available to you, but they say he's well-rounded, detailed, play driver, always a step ahead of the competition. The best center prospect in Finland has produced over 5 years. That means he's the best center Finnish player that has been produced since Barkov of the Florida Panthers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I saw Barkov in the playoffs, and if there's a player that's like him in the draft, I'm in.
Yeah.
I would say, are they talking about the best in terms of point production or the best in terms of all-around solid play?
They say on a scale from 1 to 9, they give him a 6 for skating, 6 for shooting, 6 for passing, 5 for puck handling, 6.5 for hockey sense, and 5.5 for physical presence. So, I mean, that to me is probably second or third lines. I mean, Elias Lindholm, look at who he is. Yeah. He was a number 1 when he had great wingers, but you're probably talking about a 2 or 3. And I'm more interested in the hockey sense because I think that's important. You got to be strong down the middle. Okay, now to get to the real sexy ones, the defense. I have no clue if these guys are going to fall to you because I think I've seen a lot of people that say they could go anywhere from 12 to 16. I've brought him up before, but his name is Stian Solberg. He's a kid who played in Sweden, but he's Norwegian. They say he is the nastiest defenseman that will be playing in the National Hockey League out of all of these players. And I'm trying to come up with the actual comp for him because my screen just froze on me. So give me 1 second while I try and kill some time here.
Sounds like a young Jacob Trouba then.
That is exactly who they labeled him as, is Jacob Trouba. 1 to 9, he's a 6 in every category. Skating, shooting, passing, puck handling, hockey sense, he's a 9 in physical. And he's a left-handed defenseman, 6'2", 200 pounds.
Right.
And he's already 18 years old.
I must say it would be a nice change of pace.
Dude,
you know?
like that if he, I mean, that seems like a better version of Joel Edmondson. Like, right. That's a top 4 defenseman that is bringing some nastiness to your defensive core.
And you said they're not expecting him to drop as far as the Blues have at 16?
Yeah, I think I've seen it gets him as low as like 18. So he could be there for you. Well, it just depends.
And the thing, like, same thing. It's the same conversation we had with Dvorsky last year. Like, nobody expected him to drop to 10, but weird things happen in the draft.
Everybody, I'm telling you, man, every team, there's always one in the draft that makes a stupid pick that allows a team to get a better player. So just keep that in mind. And then the dude that I am most obsessed with now understand he had a knee injury this year, and it's why he's dropped a little bit in the draft. But his name is Adam Jiricek. His brother is the top prospect for the Columbus Blue Jackets, David Jiricek. They say basically he is shades of David Jiricek of how he plays, but they call him the competitive, hardworking two-way defender who can read the game well and isn't shy about getting involved offensively because of if not for the knee injury, would have been a top 10 pick.
Yeah, that's the guy that, because of what we were talking about, the knee injury, and Button told us yesterday, his medicals, from what he's been told, check out fine.
Absolutely.
If he's sitting there at 16, he's the guy that I agree with being here at number 1. And all those guys that you just mentioned, you can see why Button told us yesterday, hey, they're going to have a decent amount of choices when they get to 16. Some of those guys may not end up falling all the way down to them, but even some of those forwards that you said are guys that you look at and say, okay, that's a guy that we can draft. Maybe not a guy that projects to be a top liner, but this guy could definitely help us once he gets here to the NHL level.
You get somebody that can help you in 2 to 3 years, that's when you're ready to compete.
Correct me if I'm wrong. When the Blues drafted Vladdy at 16, didn't he fall because he was injured?
I don't remember if it was because he was injured or if it was because he was tied to Russia, because remember, he was kind of in the Matvei Michkov thing where he had a contract that he couldn't get out of and you had to wait it out. But there was a reason he fell a little bit because he was one of the top-rated international players available to
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways, like, if there's a player that has a little bit of a negative side, whether it be injury or maybe, personal things, and it's not for his play that he drops, it's a huge opportunity for those teams later on to get some real top talent.
I'll tweet these guys' names out a little bit later on tonight once we get closer to the draft. But these are names that I think if the Blues are, or if they're there for the Blues, you're talking about a win at picking 16 overall. Grant Francis, Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Alex Ferrario. We've got David Pagnotta joining us in about 10 minutes, but coming up next, the Junk Drawer here on 101 ESPN.
Open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
All right, we got David Pagnotta of the fourth period in Sirius XM NHL Radio coming up in about 5 minutes. But T-Bone, what do you got for us in the Junk Drawer?
Well, guys, minor league teams, they have to do some weird stuff, weird kind of promotions to help get people to the stadium. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that this one's not going to work because the Lake County Captains, who are a A-ball affiliate for the Cleveland Guardians, they are now having a promotion and this is how they sent it out on Instagram and on all their social media. Why sit on the toilet and play on your phone when you can sit on a toilet and watch an entire baseball game? And they have created a whole row at their ballpark of the Roto-Rooter toilet row, in which it is truly a toilet that you sit on watching a baseball game.
Can I actually pee or poop in it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't believe that is a...
So as long as I don't have to sit there with my pants down, I'm in. Like if that's a requirement where I have to sit there with your pants down?
Here you go. You can get a VIP bathroom treatment from a dedicated bathroom attendant who will supply mouthwash, combs, and gum throughout the game.
Why would I want any of that while I'm watching a baseball game? Supply me hot dogs, nachos, and beer.
I was going to say, I would want someone to bring me food or a beverage, not mouthwash or gum while I'm watching a baseball game.
Talking about sitting on a toilet and bringing mouthwash and gum. What's happening?
It's I'll give them credit. It's creative.
Well, absolutely it is.
Listen, I can't imagine someone paying for this. I saw when I went to, I think it's Springfield, the Springfield Cardinals, the AA team for the Cardinals. They have a section, not a section, but like a little row that's VIP seating, and it's sitting in a lounger, like a lounging chair. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. You know, I don't know if I'd want to do that in 100-degree heat, sitting that, but it's a cool idea that you're trying. I see what you're doing.
I can only imagine like getting excited and be like,
this
honey.
one gets a number 2 on my scale. Yes, I knew you'd like that.
That's why he picked this as a junk drawer story.
I've been working on that one here for the last couple of minutes.
How long have you been sitting on that?
Oh, that's a good one, too.
Oh, look at us go, Grant. Come on, now your turn. I need a poop pun.
I just want to get to David Pagnotta.
He's coming up next on BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. He's truly one of the best when it comes to covering hockey, especially around the draft, the trade deadline, and he's a show favorite. He is David Pagnotta, editor-in-chief of the Fourth Period. You hear him on Sirius XM NHL Radio. You see him on NHL Network. And if you're walking around the strip of Vegas, you probably see him walking around out there in the heat as well. David, it is always great to catch up with you, man. The night of the NHL draft, which is always such an honor for you taking some time out when things are super busy. How's Vegas?
Hot. It's warm. It is. Yeah, it is warm out here, but it's lively. It's active. There's a lot of chatter going on. A lot of teams trying to get some last minute business done ahead of the draft this evening. So a lot of excitement, and hopefully we see some fireworks later today at the Sphere.
Yeah, I'm with you, David, and we talked about this last year in Nashville, where it felt like there was so much on the table of fireworks that could be had, and unfortunately, it let some down that were expecting them. But we're already seeing trades that are taking place of draft picks. That seems rare because typically first-round picks don't get moved the night of the draft. Why are we seeing so many take place before the draft even starts?
Again, with a lot of the activity, a lot of chatter going on, teams are trying to get a little bit of work done early. And for some clubs, like we saw, within the last hour, Canadians moving up in the draft, getting the 21st overall pick, sending LA the 26th and a second and a later draft pick to move up. And that's a little bit of business now because they're also trying to move up even further. So a lot of teams have a lot of irons in the fire, so they're getting a little bit of business done now to potentially do more deals. Either right before the draft or during, seeing what their options are. There are a lot of teams that are also curious. Well, all right, who's in front of me, and is this team going to get the guy that's on my list and my top pick? And if that is the case, then all right, I'll consider moving down because I've got other options here. Might as well gain an additional asset if my guy comes off the board, prematurely or what have you. And then there are also other teams that are looking to bolster their roster, immediately, as we saw last night. Andrew Mangiapane goes from Calgary to Washington in exchange for a second-round pick next year. That's just the Capitals that are looking to see who's out there and how can we bolster our offense and add secondary scoring to this lineup. Excuse me, even more. So a lot of activity and a lot of different irons in the fire for a lot of teams. And the fact that the salary cap is going up again, that's leading to more activity and getting a lot of general managers excited about the fact that, hey, we could spend even more money now. So let's do it.
And, David, one name that we've seen kind of circulating, we've talked about him here on the show, if he'd make sense for the Blues, is Martin Necas of Carolina. What are you hearing on the Martin Necas front while you're there at the NHL draft?
He's a popular guy, and Carolina's certainly popular as well because of it. Now they're juggling a few things. It sounds like Brett Pesce, Brady Shea, Teuvo Teravainen are all going to hit market as unrestricted free agents. They're looking at making a couple different moves here. Word this morning is they've upped their efforts to try to keep Jake Gensel in Raleigh. So we'll see if that gains any traction. But apparently they've upped their offer this morning to try to hold on to him. So we'll see kind of how that develops. And as they're dealing with all that, they're dealing with conversations with multiple teams involving Martin Necas. And I don't get the sense, and I haven't to this point gotten the sense that they're looking to move him for future assets. It sounds like the goal is to pull off a hockey trade and move out talent for talent if they can pull something off here. So a lot of teams interested. Seattle's been in the mix, Nashville, Boston, a few others, the Canadians to a certain extent. Some teams have been told no, like Philadelphia and Calgary. They've expressed serious interest, but, the Hurricanes turned around and said, look, unfortunately, sorry, we just don't feel like there's a fit here. We don't like anything from your team in a nicer way. So they're doing their due diligence. There's a lot of, certainly interest, but I wouldn't be shocked, I should say, if we do see the Hurricanes pull off a Necas trade later today.
David, before we get into the Blues a little bit, I did want to ask about one other team with some players that might be on the trade block, might be in the rumor conversation. What have you heard about Jacob Chychrun and Shane Pinto from the Ottawa Senators?
Yeah, well, Chychrun without question, is available. They started to explore that possibility ahead of the trade deadline. And the reason being, it started to sound like at the time, and it's the same sentiment now, that he wasn't going to be signing an extension with the Senators. That it just didn't, for whatever reason, didn't look like it worked out. Now it sounds like that's still the case now, which is why the Sens are exploring the market and are entertaining calls involving Chychrun. Pinto, more so, teams inquiring. It doesn't sound like they want to move him, but hey, we're going to listen. That's kind of the mentality there. And it's not just on him. There's Josh Norris is a name that's been popping up and kind of did before he got injured during the season. So he's another name, and this is more or less, Steve Staios, their GM, telling everybody, listen, we're open for business. We're going to listen. Doesn't mean we're going to just give everybody away. So if there's somebody that you have interest in, give us a call. Let's see if we can figure something out. And if we can't, we're happy to hold on to a lot of these guys. But Chychrun specifically available. He's up for grabs. And it's depending who you talk to and depending what teams are engaged in this, some are saying they want to, swap him out for a right shot D. Some are saying they want to get a secondary scoring asset up front in exchange. So, some of these are situational. It varies team by team in terms of what the cost would be to acquire the asset, but definitely a lot of chatter surrounding the Sens and Chychrun.
We're talking with David Pagnotta, senior writer for the Fourth Period. David, when you look at the Blues side of things, and we've talked a lot about the unknown with Pavel Buchnevich, and you referenced with Martin Necas how they're looking for a player-for-player swap if they're not getting the draft pick compensation. Do you believe Pavel Buchnevich is available via trade, and have you heard his name pop up in any conversations?
Very similar to some of the guys I just explained with Ottawa. I think the Blues will listen, but unless it's something that knocks their socks off, they're happy to hold on to. It was very similar during the season, where they entertained calls, they entertained inquiries, from different teams leading up to the trade deadline. Obviously, nothing blew their socks off, so they held on to him. He's got another year on his contract. He has a 12-team no-trade list, so he does have some say in where he could potentially end up. But at the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if they're seriously exploring an extension and trying to get him locked in for, a multi-year type of deal. So I think, from Buchnevich's perspective and from the Blues' perspective, it's, okay. Well, again, similar to Ottawa for some of their guys, and similar to a lot of teams like Anaheim, for example, Trevor Zegras. He's available. You got to give us the right offer if you want us to consider anything. Similar situation here with Buchnevich.
David, what about on the Blues blue line? You had in your piece last night on the Fourth Period that Colton Parayko's name is popping up in trade talks. What are you hearing about some of the defensemen for the St. Louis Blues?
Yeah, they'd like to move out a body. Everybody pretty much has a no-trade clause, so it may make things a little difficult to free up a little money on that back end in order to address other areas on the team. But, they're, again, willing to listen, not just on Parayko, but you also have Krug and Leddy and Faulk. Ran into Faulk yesterday, by the way. He's here for the NHLPA meetings. Everybody's just kind of going with the flow and seeing what happens. Again, these guys control a lot of what the narrative is with their no trade clauses. Some of them have, I think some guys switch or shifts over to a limited list. But that might not be for another season. I might be off there. I might jump the gun on that. There may be another season before that shifts from a full no trade to a list. But some of these teams out there are looking to shore up their back end and add a veteran presence. We know Toronto has been kicking around on Parayko for a little while here. Brad Treliving certainly likes him. He had interest in him when he was the GM in Calgary. There were obviously some talks that popped up earlier on in the season. And he's the type of defenseman, Parayko is, that Toronto is looking to add to their blue line. Somebody who's controllable with term, but has a big body presence on that blue line. So that's the type of player they're looking at. I know the conversations were had. Not sure where they're at this point. But St. Louis, again, in terms of their defensemen, are willing to listen.
David, this feels like an offseason, though, that if you're the Blues and you're trying to move on from Torrey Krug, Justin Faulk, even a Nick Leddy, that other teams are more willing to listen. Now, of course, you got that no-trade clause, but with the limited names that are available via free agency and for what the asking price is for a lot of these guys on the trade block, Could this be an opportune moment for Doug Armstrong to move one of those bigger contracts?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, unlike what happened last year in the summer, for his sake and for the team, I hope they relay the message to the player to say, hey, at least we're looking to move you. There are some options. Would you consider anywhere in terms of waiving your no trade? We obviously know what happened last season with Krug executing his no trade and saying, no, I'm not going to Philly. Are there other options that may pop up for either him or some other, somebody else on that back end where they could, potentially waive the no trade for? It saves everybody time, hassle, and trouble. But this is because this is effectively the silly season again. Teams are together. Funny note, the Canadians and Kings who made that trade earlier today, they're staying at the same hotel. So sometimes it makes it a little easier to be face-to-face in terms of trying to complete a trade. So this time of year with everybody around, it certainly gets things percolating a little bit. And it's a good opportunity for teams to take care of some house cleaning now. So if the right offer presents itself, I believe Doug Armstrong will seriously look at making that type of a move and moving out one of those guys on that back end.
Final question for David Pagnotta, who is a very busy man as the NHL draft starts this evening out in Vegas. David, I've brought up the potential of offer sheeting players a couple of times this offseason, mostly because there are teams that are in tight cap situations. And yes, it's a high price to pay if you were to offer sheet a Pinto or a Martin Necas. But does this feel like an offseason that maybe GMs are more likely to take that risk than years past? Because of the increase in the cap, and some teams that may consider that option have beefed up and filled their cupboards up with some additional draft picks. So it gives them a little bit of flexibility in terms of potentially giving up whatever the compensation is if the players or if the team doesn't match the offer. And the other thing that there's a misconception. You can't just sign someone to an offer sheet. They actually have to agree. Like the player has to say, yeah, you know what, I want to go here. I'll sign this contract. So it's not just going out there and just, scooping some guy up from under the rug. But we don't see it often. But because of, again, the extra cap space and some of these teams having a little bit more draft capital, it gives some teams a little bit more muscle, I would say, in terms of doing something there. And that's also something that I think Carolina, with respect to Martin Necas, might be a little weary of if they can't make something work here ahead of the draft. And that might force some of these teams, maybe not force, but at least incentivize some of these teams to make a move now versus the risk of losing a guy via an offer sheet. David, we always appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on with us and give us a little insight. Enjoy the draft tonight, and people can follow along on your Twitter account at The Fourth Period. Thanks so much, man, and stay out of the heat. Stay in the casino.
Yeah, I'm taking in all the AC I can get.
Have a good one, man. That's David Pagnotta of The Fourth Period, editor-in-chief, Sirius XM NHL Radio and NHL Network. And I understand with Pagnotta, it's rumors. You hear a lot from different agents because it's the game that they play. But I do find it very interesting that Elliot Friedman has said it. Jeff Merrick has said it. I believe Pierre LeBrun has put it out there. Frank Saravalli has put it out there. And now you heard it from David Pagnotta. There seems to be a lot of interest in defense this offseason. And I didn't get to ask him because we were tight on time there, but Detroit's the one I'm most curious about because they moved Wallman and Gostisbehere and don't really have a lot of defensemen in their system. Their two big guys are already basically on their team. This does feel like a draft that could provide more fireworks than expected. The guy we haven't even heard his name a lot about recently is Mitch Marner. You haven't even heard anything with that. Like, there's a lot going on between now and Monday when free agency opens up.
Yeah, this certainly does feel like the offseason because the cap has gone up and you've got teams that are looking for blue liners. Where I think is going to become interesting is if you're a team and you're looking for a defenseman, and we played the cut earlier, I think, of Friedman saying they basically ran off what felt like half the league who was looking for him. The question is, okay, do I go out to the free agent market, which is kind of blah? We've talked about that this year.
Yeah.
This defensive market is not great. Do I overpay that guy, or do I look to the trade route, and is there somebody that I like? Is Torrey Krug better at $6.5 million over 3 years than somebody on the free agent market who can get probably $5 million on a 4 or 5 year deal that you don't really feel great about? That's where it's going to get interesting, and maybe that's where the Blues would say to themselves, if they're going to try and work out a deal, we'll retain some salary. I don't know if they would do that or not, since it is 3 more years on Krug's contract at 6.5, but I'm not saying eat 50%. Can he eat like $1 million off of that? Make it a little bit more appetizing. That's where I think it's going to get interesting, and if they're going to try and get a deal done, I wonder if they're going to have to do that.
Again, draft tonight starting at 7 o'clock, I believe, is the first round out in Vegas, and then 6 o'clock. Thank you, Grant. And then the second through 7th round starts Saturday afternoon out in Las Vegas. And our insider for The Athletic, Jeremy Rutherford, is out there. So any updates he'll be providing up on his social media account. We'll get more into the Blues on the Rewind. We've also got One's Got to Go coming up in about 15 minutes, where you send us 3 scenarios. We'll tell you which one has to go. But back to some Cardinals, because we got an update on Lars Nootbaar yesterday. Where does he fit into this lineup once he returns? We'll discuss that next here on 101 ESPN. So last night at the ballpark, T-Bone and I, along with the Cardinals media, got an update on Lars Nootbaar. He spoke with the media and said that he is headed on his rehab assignment to where tonight he's expected to play with the Springfield Cardinals. He didn't really know which direction he was going for the Springfield Cardinals. He said, I'm going south and then I'm going north.
Didn't have to throw him under the bus, dude.
Hey, man, I don't blame him because, frankly, I didn't know which Springfield he was going to. Missouri, Illinois, but regardless, he's playing tonight. And I think Ollie said after the game, 5 innings is what he was expected to get. And Lars said it was probably going to be somewhere between like 4 to 5 games.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, 4 or 5, maybe even 6. It just depends on timing. That's really the biggest thing. And he is supposed to play. It was 5 games today, I believe. In the field was what Ollie said.
5 innings. I think he said he was going to get some DHs in there. So you're probably talking about early July where we're going to be seeing Lars Nootbaar, which is a good thing for this team because Lars Nootbaar, I know people say he wasn't hitting this season. He was hitting. He started to come into his own right before he got injured again. So it's going to be good to get him back. 1, you got him in the outfield, which gives you some defense. But 2, you get that bat in the lineup. And that's the part I find most interesting. Now, you have to temper the expectations because typically when guys come back from injury, it's not all back to you right away. There's timing that has to get back up to speed. You have to kind of figure things out once again. But we'll go down the path that Lars Nootbaar does return to form when he's back. I think it's pretty obvious where he's hitting after what we've seen with the Cardinals lineup. And look, Paul Goldschmidt has been better as of late. Nolan Arenado got a home run last night. I believe that he is hitting in your top 5, and in no particular order, your 5 top hitters, Mason Wynn, Alec Burleson, Lars Nootbaar, Wilson Contreras, Brendan Donovan. And I would even listen to the argument of Nolan Gorman when he's hitting properly. But there's no way, shape, or form Lars Nootbaar is hitting below Goldschmidt or Arenado when he returns, when he gets back to form, which I think is an important asterisk to put on it.
Yeah, when he comes back, I think that they should hit him 4th. I think he should be the cleanup hitter, or you move him to 2 and you put Burley at 4.
I'm with you.
One of those spots. And Ollie Marmol likes to do kind of that right, left. He likes to try and make it harder for teams to find lanes with their bullpen. I wonder if they will consider moving Goldschmidt down to the 5 spot once Lars Nootbaar comes back. Now, look, in his last 10 games, Goldschmidt has been pretty good. 810 OPS. He's starting to get on base at a good clip at 350, hitting for average and hitting for a little bit of pop with 2 homers and a double in the last 10. But when you look at his numbers as a whole, even this month, they're still not all that impressive. A 669 OPS. And look, maybe this is that 10-game stretch, what I've just talked about when that started. Maybe that's the start of something for Paul Goldschmidt. But as well as it feels like he has played of late, he still has not had a month in which he's had an OPS above 700.
You're right.
So I think when Nootbaar comes back, and I'm not even worried about it like taking time for him to get adjusted to the major league level. The whole point of going on a rehab assignment is to work on timing. Yeah, there will be some things that will be
sucks
different.
In AAA.
Totally fair. There are some things that he will have to work on when he gets to the big leagues. But as we see with Contreras, I think Contreras looks fine for the most part. You know, I don't feel like he's lost at the plate. I think when Nootbaar comes back, I think you go Mason Wynn 1, Burley or Nootbaar 2, and then you go Contreras 3, and then whoever the other one is that you didn't use there in that 2 spot, Burley or Nootbaar as the 4 hitter, and then you go Goldie 5. And I think there's an argument to hit Donnie 5 because he's been playing really well of late, but just knowing how they probably don't want to go back-to-back lefties, I think you have Goldie 5 and have Donovan 6, and then the bottom of your order, 7, 8, 9, is Arenado, Gorman, Michael Ciani.
Yeah.
And I think that's your best lineup when Lars Nootbaar comes back and he's starting every game in probably right field would be my guess, and Burley becomes your everyday DH.
We got a text that said Alex Lars was striking out way too much before he was injured. No, he was not. His last 14 games before he was injured, he struck out 14 times. But he had a 340 batting average, a 441 OPS, and a 441 on-base percentage and a 961 OPS. Like, that was a dude, and 2 home runs, by the way, 10 RBIs and 9 walks. That's a dude that is hitting in my 2 or my 4 spot because I have my guy, Mason Wynn, who makes contact, and Lars Nootbaar was doing the exact same thing. What I need somebody who can come up with the big hit in the 3, 4, 5 spot right now. And we've seen some of these guys that can accomplish it. You basically right now need Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado to be hitting 6 or 7 for you, to where they're coming up once you've already cleared the bases if your first 5 batters, because that's what you can do. You're talking about taking a lead in the first or second inning and not relying on Goldschmidt and Arenado. I think I said this earlier this week or last week. Those guys have become complementary pieces while the other younger players have become the main pieces for this offense. And when Lars Noot returns, and I understand what you're saying, it's a rehab assignment. That's where you're supposed to get your timing back. But even with Wilson Contreras, we're kind of seeing it takes a little bit to get back into that form. Your best case scenario offensively is having 5 guys who can put you up by 2 or 3 runs before you even talk about Goldschmidt and Arenado.
Now, I do view Nootbaar, and it's kind of the same way I view Burley. Like, I feel like those guys are more of like top 2 hitters, 1-2 guys, get on base, set it up for the meat of the order, which in typical years when they're right is Goldie and Arenado. You know, the guys that hit the 30 home runs, 100 RBIs. I still don't know if this team really has a traditional 4-hitter. And that's where some of my skepticism of this team comes. And look, maybe you don't need a traditional 4-hitter. Maybe you don't need the classic 30 home or 100 RBI guy. You need the like death by 1,000 cuts to where when you look at the Cardinals, you go, Mason Wynn, what's he do? Well, he hits for average and gets on base. What's Burley do? Makes contact, gets on base. Contreras is a guy that could, I don't know if he'd ever be a 30, 100 RBI guy, but has serious pop in his bat. Nootbaar, what's he do? Hits for average, gets on base, and can slug a little bit with 20 home runs. What's Donovan do? The exact same thing. Yeah. All of a sudden, it's not the classic, wow, look at the power that you see in the middle of that order. It is more of, holy cow, how do you get these guys out? Because they've got great batter's eyes. They can draw walks. They'll take advantage of what you give them. And it's that kind of what I mentioned yesterday where it feels like the offense is more of a pack mentality, which is 1 through 7 deep that has some nice pop to it, but gets on base at a very good clip. So that's why I would hit him 4th currently, even though in the back of my mind I'm screaming to myself, oh, dude, he's not a traditional 4-hitter. I don't think you have a traditional 4-hitter on this roster. When Gorman is hitting, he is that guy because he can be a if he ever becomes consistent with his bat, could be a 30 home run, 100 RBI guy. But as we know at this point, Nolan Gorman's just going to continue to go through these roller coasters at times where it's like, wow, that is unbelievable. That guy looks awesome. And then there's going to be times where it's, whoa, that guy can't buy a hit.
Yeah, I think it's time to look at it untraditionally, though. Like, and I understand what you're saying. Like, you do need a traditional hitter, but right now you are a death by 1,000 cuts. Like, ideally, we're talking about Mason Wynn leading off, Lars Nootbaar or Alec Burleson in the 2-hole. Then you're talking about Contreras in the 3-hole, and then you're talking about another one of those lefties, Burleson or Nootbaar, in the 4-hole. And now you're going righty, lefty to where you're really causing teams to figure out how to handle that lineup. The ideal spot to be in is to have a Goldschmidt and Arenado to where then they could be hitting after that next lefty. But that's where it always comes back to you got to get Nolan Arenado going. Paul Goldschmidt is not the power hitter that you saw when he was the MVP. He's more of the contact hitter now. You need Nolan Arenado to do what he did last night. Or you need Nolan Gorman to get back to that 40 home run potential. Because when you do that, now your lineup is longer and dangerous.
I think the one good thing for the Cardinals right now is to what we're saying, to your point there on like when Gorman is hitting, well, you can move him up in the order. If Arenado starts hitting, you can move him up into the order. And you don't feel like it's, right now, it doesn't feel necessarily like it's super panic mode. Like, you know, they have guys that have stepped up to where you put on the train conductor hat yesterday, where the offense is hitting good pitching. Do they need those guys to hit? Absolutely, because I think that's how they can make a deep postseason run if you can get both Nolans going, Nolan Arenado and Nolan Gorman. But the nice thing is for the regular season is because the lineup as a whole is hitting, it buys you time to try and get those guys going. And they have the ability to kind of make this lineup flexible. You know, when you think of lineups of the past, it would be like after 1 through 5, like 2022, for example. Their 1 through 5 was pretty much, I think it was Donovan, you had Pujols, Goldie, Arenado, and I don't remember who the other bat was in there at the time. He was hurt in 22. It was Nootbaar, I think. Nootbaar was up at the time, I believe. And then it was like after you got past that 5 spot, it was a massive drop-off. Well, right now, though even Arenado is struggling, it's not. He's 4% below league average. He's almost a league average hitter. That's okay if he's in the 7-hole.
Yeah.
You know? And same with Nolan Gorman. He's a couple percentage points below 100, which is league average. I think he's going to be right around there by the time we get to season's end. You have some flexibility to where it isn't like in years past. If Arenado and Goldie were not hitting, like in 2022, for example, you really didn't have anybody else outside of Pujols that could help carry you for a little bit of a stretch time.
He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. So again, Lars Nootbaar headed out on his rehab assignment, expected to be out there for 4 to 5 games before he's back with the Cardinals as he starts with the Springfield Cardinals. When we return, it's time for One's Gotta Go, a Friday staple. You send us 3 scenarios. We will tell you which one has to go. Our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. One's Gotta Go next on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals lost last night 11-4 in the first game of the series against the Reds. Miles Mikolas had a tough outing, 4 1/3 innings for him, 12 hits and 9 earned runs. Cardinals will look to bounce back today against the Reds in Game 2 at Busch Stadium. It'll be Frankie Montas for the Reds and Andre Palante for the Cardinals. The Blues will be in Vegas tonight as it's the first round of the NHL draft. They're slated to pick 16th overall tonight at the Sphere. Draft will start at 6 o'clock. And for City SC this weekend, they'll head up to Vancouver to take on the Whitecaps, who are 7-4-7 this season. City, of course, looking to win their fourth match this year and record a victory for the first time since May 11th. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Count that big bang.
Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. You send us 3 scenarios to our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. We will tell you which one has to go. Let's do this from the 314 in honor of NHL Draft Night, NHL Draft, NBA Draft, MLB Draft, or NFL Draft. Ooh. NBA, NHL, NFL, MLB. The 4 big sport drafts.
So NFL, NBA stay for me because when those guys get drafted, for the most part, you typically see those guys that year. Baseball and hockey is the one where it's going to come down to. I'm going to say the NHL draft. And the reason I say that is because a lot of those guys that end up getting drafted, or not a lot, but most, play in a different country for like their junior career. So, you don't even see them at the state level until really the first time you kind of see them is when they play in the World Juniors tournament. So that's the only reason I would say that, at least for the baseball draft. Some of those kids you get to see play in like the College World Series, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to go with the MLB draft, but the fact that you can sort of watch them in college here, that is a good point. NFL definitely has the best, in my opinion, just because you watch so much college football, and then those players are effective like the year that they're drafted, the season right after.
It makes such an impact on that season.
Yeah, I think it's tough for MLB and NHL just because those players aren't impactful immediately. So, I mean, in terms of popularity, it would be NHL.
See, I would get rid of MLB because you can't trade picks. I think there's so much interest in the NHL because at least there's movement. You could trade players for picks. You can move up in the draft, move back in the draft. And the one thing that I will say with baseball, and it's just because I'm not as much of a baseball nut as I am an NHL nut, I always have to look up when the player that makes it to the Major League Baseball level, when he was drafted. Like, I never remember when that player was drafted because it takes so long. At least with NHL, sometimes it takes 3 to 4 years, but you remember at least a successful draft versus a bust draft, especially with the first round. And like, as excited as I am as the 7th overall pick for the Cardinals this year, I feel like in 4 years I'm going to be thinking like, oh, who was this guy again? So that's the part that I at least go with the draft. Let's do this one from the 314, the barbecue edition from the 314. A ribeye, a porterhouse, or a brisket?
So brisket stays for me.
Absolutely brisket. Brisket's number 1. You just got to wait longer. So porterhouse steak is just a T-bone steak. So we know what this guy's going to go with over here.
You can't get rid of T-bone. I would say it's the ribeye.
I mean, I'm with you. I think the ribeye, I think they're the trashiest out of those 3.
I would agree with that.
Get too much fat on it. Yeah, it's not as good.
I don't
get some juice with my steak. This guy over here doesn't know what I'm talking about.
I just don't like barbecue.
Oh, that's...
Who doesn't like barbecue?
I know, I'm like the only one.
That's not... You're not American.
I don't like ranch either, so I'm not Midwestern.
No, Midwestern or man. Where are you from?
Here.
I promise.
Don't believe you.
No.
I don't believe you.
We're not claiming you.
One's got to go. Growing in your garden edition. Tomatoes, cucumbers, or jalapenos?
So I like
spicy
stuff. Or as
Polo told me yesterday, jalapenos.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
I like spicy stuff, so jalapenos will stay for me. So it comes down to tomatoes or cucumbers. I'm gonna keep tomatoes. I'm gonna get rid of cucumbers, and
Good
the reason
choice.
for it, not so much because I'm a big tomato guy by themselves, but I love ketchup. And I could do without cucumbers become
smart.
pickles. I could do without pickles or cucumbers. I'm not getting a mani-pedi, so I would say I'm getting rid of the cucumbers here.
Typically, the cucumbers are for like facial work,
sorry, that's
not a
right,
mani-pedi, but hey, man, you're close.
Same ballpark.
Yeah, same ballpark.
I'm getting rid of the cucumbers as well. I don't like pickles. I don't like cucumbers. I'm kind of on the same boat as you.
Surprised you like ketchup. Too much flavor.
Well, I don't like ketchup.
He doesn't.
Oh, okay.
He showed me
But-
his plate yesterday. It was bland chicken with bland hamburger meat and salt and pepper on it.
Just trying to get my protein in.
I get it, man.
No, but with tomatoes, like you could use them for so many different things, not just ketchup.
Dude, my wife and
I
I
had
are...
one on a taco the other day. Fantastic.
My wife and I are growing a lot of vegetables in our garden. So we have jalapenos, we have zucchini, we're not cucumbers, but we're doing Roma tomatoes. And we just picked some earlier today, and I shouldn't have been excited as I was about the tomato picture that she sent me.
Really big or small?
So they're not big, but they're like the oval shaped tomatoes. It's typically what they use in bruschetta. It's what they use in pico de gallo. Like they use Roma tomatoes with it. So those are the ones that they got to stay. So yeah, cucumbers got to go for those mani-pedis. One's got to go board game edition: Monopoly, Life, or Battleship.
Monopoly, Life, or Battleship?
This one's easy. The Battleship and Life don't cause family arguments. Monopoly causes damage to relationships.
Yeah.
I refuse to play that game with anybody.
Life doesn't take that long to play, right? Like Monopoly can last.
Depends on how long you want to live. If you keep drinking coffee and no water, you're not going to make it very long.
I drink an energy drink a day, so
my game of life's to 35.
Exhaustion might kick me up by 40.
I would say get rid of Monopoly just because I can remember playing Monopoly, and my family never got to where relationships were hurt by it from playing the game. But I just remember it can take forever.
Yeah.
I think Life doesn't take that long to play, and of course Battleship doesn't take that long to play. So I would say Monopoly just because it's too long for me.
No joke. My family instilled a rule when we were younger that we cannot play Monopoly when my parents aren't around. Because my sister and I used to get to the point where we would throw things at each other. I'll never forget. I got in trouble for throwing a clothes hanger at my sister because of Monopoly. So we don't play that game. My wife, we have like Monopoly games at home. She's like, this will be fun. I said, no, I'm not playing this game.
What's your go-to board game then?
Mine's Clue. I love me some Clue.
Oh, really? I'm not that big a fan of Clue.
I know how to cheat in Clue, so like people don't play with me
Probably
very
why,
often.
because it's easy. To me, it's easy to kind of get the answer.
You just got to watch where the person marks an X on their thing, and then you start narrowing it down.
Does Yahtzee count as a board game?
I think so.
It's like in that same category. I'd say that's my favorite.
I like Yahtzee. Yahtzee's a good one.
We play Yahtzee on New Year's.
Life's fun. I've never played Battleship because I just think it's dumb, and I've never played Risk. Somebody brought up
Risk is
Risk.
really fun.
I've never played that either.
Yeah.
Risk is fun. It takes a while. It does take a while, though.
That sounds about right. All right, this one. St. Louis Athlete Edition. One's got to go. Ryan Helsley, Jordan Binnington, Roman Berkey.
Berkey stays because if he wasn't here,
It's Binnington stays too. Like I think
City wouldn't have a point. I'm just being honest. I don't know if they would if he
They've
wasn't
had
their
a
goal.
couple 0-0 draws.
Yeah, well, they would have lost those games.
I think it's Helsley.
I do too, and the reason for me for Helsley and like the ideal answer would be none of them is, I think you've got the arms in the Cardinals bullpen that if Helsley, like for example, got hurt or was traded, you could kind of fill his role. You've got Kittredge, you've got JoJo, Ryan Fernandez is arguably like their second best reliever right now. If you get rid of Binnington, yeah, they have Hofer. Hofer's look good, but I don't know if he's ready for the number one job.
He's not.
And I couldn't even tell you who the backup is for St. Louis City.
If Nashville doesn't believe Oskarov is ready for the number one job, Hofer really ain't ready for the number one job. That tells you everything you need to know. All right, let's wrap it up with this one from the 618 Hygiene Edition. Toothpaste, I'm assuming that means brushing your teeth, putting on deodorant, or shampooing your hair.
Oh, I got to shampoo my hair.
Really?
Yeah.
You can get by with conditioner for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know if you need to really wash your hair if you're like, because we don't have a lot of hair.
You're
Like,
not
if you're-
supposed to wash your hair every day.
Oh, yeah, I stopped doing that with
seen
my
that,
daughter
yeah.
because apparently I'm not supposed to do, because like we do it every night, and my wife's like, yeah, stop. I go, okay.
I would say of those, I think the one I would do is, man, all those would be tough to not do.
The one that impacts me on a daily basis, put your damn deodorant on. Because nobody likes to stand next to somebody without deodorant.
I was leaning that direction, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, man, you couldn't go out in public, really. Same with like brushing your teeth though. Like it just doesn't feel. I guess it would be the.
It'd be the
hair.
shampoo. I don't like the feel of when you don't brush your teeth. Like it's an awful. Especially me who's got like implants. Like that's awful now.
Here's a question: can you use dry shampoo?
My wife uses dry shampoo like 3 times a week.
It's effective.
Like
you?
Now you have
sometimes
you have more hair than T-Bone and I do. Like you've got more of a flow than we do.
And if I'm being honest, if you just told me I had to get rid of like shampooing, I'd just shave my head.
Yeah, that's very true.
I only shampoo my hair twice a week because before when I was doing it every day, I was starting to lose hair because of it. So I use dry shampoo a lot for that reason. Actually,
it makes a lot of sense. Somebody said that I've never worn deodorant my whole life and I smell better than my friends. You, sir or madam, are a freaking liar because I know that's not true.
I'm sorry you've been lied to your whole life.
We'll hit the rewind next on 101 ESPN. Closing things down on a Friday with T-Bone and Grant Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. BK will be back with us on Monday, post-NHL draft weekend, and we will be live at Centene Community Ice Center for Prospect Camp. We'll be out there on Monday and Tuesday, broadcasting from our Centene Community Ice Center E&B Granite Studios. And then Tuesday night, Joe Vitale and I are going to be broadcasting the Prospects game, a scrimmage that will be played for the Blues Prospects, and you'll be able to follow along with that up on our website, 101ESPN.com, and on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. And we'll rewind it there with the draft tonight. Round 1, Blues pick 16th overall, barring some type of trade. And then they've got 2 seconds, 2 thirds, 1 fourth, 1 fifth, and 2 7th-round picks on Saturday. So barring moves, the Blues just active once tonight. But after hearing JR's report earlier today on the opening drive, stating that from what he's heard, sources are telling him that Torrey Krug has been approached about waiving a no-trade clause, and he has provided the Blues with a 6-team no-trade list, or a 6-team trade list, and then Justin Faulk is also, according to JR, sources telling him that has been approached about waiving a no-trade clause. This feels like the offseason that Doug pulls off a move to open up a opportunity on the defensive side. I don't know where. I don't know who. It really comes down to what teams the players are willing to go to. But these two players being approached about it and offering up a no-trade or a trade list tells me that Scott Perunovich and Matt Kessel are getting advanced time next season. And that leans into what the Blues are trying to accomplish with this retool. You're giving these players an opportunity to play. The real question is just going to be, can they pull it off this weekend?
Yeah, it's clear they're trying to free up room for, I guess, Kessel to be their top 4 defenseman on the right side, move Faulk down to the third pair if he's still here. And that means they clearly view Kessel as a better defenseman at this point in his career than Justin Faulk. And then the other one is Scott Perunovich clear up the power play unit would be my guess for him. I don't know if they're clearing up the top 4 for him. They might be, but I think that is more of a sign of if Perunovich is going to play here this year and they sign him to that 1-year deal, they want to see what he looks like on the power play. Give him every opportunity possible. Let the kids play. You know, they're going to get younger. They've got some young kids that'll be on this roster. Let's see what it looks like. And pretty much, though, not as young as like a Bolduc. He's young in terms of his NHL career because he's dealt with so many injuries. Feels like the offseason that they're going to be able to do it because of the cap going up, because they've talked with Krug and Faulk, and it sounds like there is some interest in Torrey Krug at least waiving it if they can get a deal done. This is what we've been talking about for the last, feels like 3 years, 2 years at minimum, of you've got to upgrade the blue line, or you've got to at least just make change for change's sake. And it certainly feels like things seem to be trending in that direction for the Blues. We'll see if they're able to swing a deal, because it's not a great sign if you're saying we think that these defensemen we have internally are better than these guys, and these guys carry a $6.5 million cap hit. But we'll see if they'll be able to make a move, because there are a lot of teams that are out there looking for defensemen.
I think they're trying to jumpstart their retool. And what I mean by that is they realize that in a couple of years they want to be competitive, and to get there we have to make sure that the defensemen we are believing are going to be there with us are ready to step into that higher leverage role, i.e. Matt Kessel, Scott Perunovich. It's what they did with Joel Edmondson and Colton Parayko. Like their rookie year, they made the NHL roster, and throughout those first couple of years, it was playing top 4 minutes. They wanted to get them right, and I think that's where you're at right now. It's really going to come down to, is that player willing to move the no trade? But it feels more likely this offseason because there's a lot more uncertainty going into next year if you're these defensemen for the Blues. And it also tells me you're going to see significant ice time for Scott Perunovich and Matt Kessel. But again, a lot of this relies on what takes place tonight with the draft, tomorrow with the second night of the draft, and then you've got free agency opening up on Monday. So, again, 6 o'clock is when the NHL draft starts tonight. The Blues pick 16th overall. We'll be with you on Monday from Prospect Camp at Centene Community Ice Center. Everyone have a great weekend. A great job to Grant Francis helping us out today with BK Out. Stick around. The Fast Lane coming up next on 101 ESPN.